Well, Charles, welcome back.
It's my great pleasure to be back.
Wonderful to have you in the studio. We're back on our regular Sunday schedule.
If it's Sunday, it must be Sunday with Charles.
That's right. I like that. That's very catchy. So, Charles, so much has been going on. It's really almost unbelievable. Where should we begin?
Well, before we even get into the first few links, I'd like to address this broadcast to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and to his advisors inside the White House, inside the executive branch, as well as to the great, not that the President isn't great, but the great Seb Gorka and Steve Bannon, who are outside the White House now thinking through how to animate the supporters, the people who do want to see the Great Swamp drained, who do want to see the globalist corruption ended. This broadcast is for you. What we are going to reveal in this broadcast is a simple way to cut through the messing and use laws that are already on the books to discipline and drain the swamp. We talked at the last Sunday show, we talked about the threats posed by globalism, specifically unregulated globalism. It's not like layers of bureaucracy around the world are really working anywhere against upstarts like this show and others, and companies that didn't even exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, now have these gigantic global market positions. Why? Because you don't need layers and layers of bureaucracy. And people who work in the private sector, we understand that. People who work in the swamp, they don't want to see the swamp drained. So you're in a pitched battle now. It's tough to keep all the pieces straight. We've got a way to do it. And what we'd like to begin noting is that November 15th, 2017 is a very significant date. We have before that, November 4th, 2017, the theory that Antifa and these various ruffians around the United States are going to rise up, hooligans, and try to steal the election from the American people who voted to elect Donald Trump. That may come and go, and that may or may not result in disruption and difficulty. But the one thing that is certain and cannot be changed by anybody is that anyone who operates, any sort of trustees and their professional advisors who operates a charity that has a December 31st year end has until November 15th, 2017 as a final deadline to submit tax reforms created and explaining what happened in 2016.
Does that hold true even for people who walk around in oven mitt pantsuits?
Especially they.
Oh, really?
Especially they. So the rub here is that this is the first period in a long time where the IRS and the Department of Justice will not be controlled by either holdovers of either the Bush 1 or 2, Clinton, or Obama. This is the first time. And so up until now, there's always been the ability of the swamp to use the considerable leverage that the IRS and the DOJ holds over you to ensure that you don't ask these tough questions.
And you feel like that's setting the stage for the real change, the fact that the IRS and the DOJ are now controlled by President Trump rather than...
Well, that and the fact that for the first time, these pieces all have to gel together, but for the first time, it is in the Democrats' interest to consign the Clintons and those who would act like the Clintons. It seems that the Obamas want to try it with their foundation. Consign them to the dustbin of history if they really do want to be relevant in 2018 and aspire to win back the White House in 2020. It's actually in the interest of people on the right and the left to see justice done here, to go in and understand what happened, what actually happened, not that fictional book, what actually happened between about 1989, when George H.W. Bush sat in the White House, forward to the present, as decisions were made, collective decisions were made to embrace globalism, unregulated globalism, embrace cronyism, and sell to the American people the idea that there was a real division politically, when in fact there is no real division at the top and in the deep state. It's all one great mess, frankly, exploiting the fact that there is no effective global regulator. That means that multinational companies and multinational, in theory, charities like the Clinton Foundation can operate with abandon. They can be used to launder money and pay people off and overpay for things and buy politicians and sell politicians. This unregulated globalist mess can do just that. Now, what Donald Trump appreciates, because he's a smart business person, is that, and as we talked about in our last Sunday show, the United States market is by far and away the most consequential annual market to sell goods and products. We are gigantic in size relative to the next player, which would be China, and then below that Japan, and then Germany is, I think, a sixth the size of our market, roughly. And so, you can't, it's not that we should make America great and snub the rest of the world. I don't think that's what Trump is saying. Is let's have a sense of balance and proportion. I mean, if you want to be a serious business, you're going to want to sell into the largest market in the world. And that's a tremendous lever we have against abusers of the system who are trying to say, copy our goods and services in an environment where they don't enforce, they have environmental regulations on the books, but they don't enforce them. And they have employment regulations on the books, but they don't enforce them. It's a chance to stand up and say, hang on, we're a real country with a lot of wealth, a lot of infrastructure. We've made a lot of investments. We're a military power. And if you want to sell into our country, you're going to have to, play by our rules inside our country. And I think that's what he's standing up for. He's got a considerable lever there. When we go back now to this deadline, what this means is, perish the thought that any major contributor to the Clinton Foundation has already filed a tax return relating to 2016, where they claim they made a significant donation to the Clinton Foundation and characterized it as being a public charity, because it wasn't.
And to clarify, they're in a lot of trouble if they've done that, right? The contributors are in trouble.
We will get into it in some depth when we go through the slides, but yeah, the contributors, if they're private foundations, which would be the Gates Foundation as an example, or the Rockefeller, those foundations have to explain to the IRS in reports that are available to the public for us all to see every single significant contribution that they made to a third party of $5,000 or more. They have to explain the address, they have to characterize what was the purpose of their contribution, and they have to describe the recipient. And they have to say, if it's a public charity, they have to check before they make the donation that it was a public charity. And woe betide a private foundation that has gone ahead and said to the IRS that they made a contribution to the Clinton Foundation because it was a public charity, when it isn't.
Yeah.
And we will show that it has not been a public charity for years. And
Right.
these are smart, these big foundations are very smart. Woe betide also a corporation that may have done the same thing, because a corporation is covered by, a donor is covered by a different set of rules, and a corporation has to make absolutely certain before they make contributions that are characterized as being charitable donations, that the recipient, the Clinton Foundation, was validly organized and operated, which it has never been.
Now, just to take you back about a half step and talk about the importance of this deadline, you brought up H.W. Bush, and of course, Bill Clinton was the president right after him. I think a strong argument could be made that that was sort of intentional, that H.W. kind of helped groom Billy Boy a little bit, their relationship and Nina. I don't want to go too far down that road, but the point being, I feel in many ways that George H.W. Bush has been kind of like maybe not the quarterback, but the general manager of the deep state for a long time, and he's got a real kind of long ball view on this stuff. And the Clinton Foundation and the relationship between Bill and Hillary Clinton is a critically important and historic one, not just in terms of the presidency and her being the first female candidate for a major party, but the whole way in which this is almost like the super swamp, the way it's being set up, where we have this presidential foundation that for many, many years, very wealthy donors have been contributing into, with what was, by almost all measures, a foregone conclusion that Hillary was going to become president. It's important that this fraud be stopped now, because we see the second generation of it in the Obama Foundation. And I know I've spoken about this before, but it's important to reiterate that this notion of husband and wife teams being presidents, That's new with the Clintons. You know, Barbara Bush was never expected to or remotely anywhere near running for president.
Right.
So it's important that this be pointed out now, that this be stopped, and this never be allowed to happen, because this is like a gigantic loophole for billions of dollars and tons of abuse and all the types of things we've seen the Clinton Foundation do.
I agree. So what we should do, I think, because we've got a lot to unpack here for you, is let's start by going through a few things that just happened in the news to wrap our arms around, because we sit here, even just minutes before we went on air at 3 p.m., details are starting to leak out from the Mueller investigation. I mean, very specific details. Apparently, the indictment may involve Manafort, it may involve suspicious wire transfers, there are details concerning the amount. But before we get into all that, I put up links, or I asked you to put up links to some stories where the press describes this Robert Mueller in glowing terms. Yes, he was a captain in the Army. Yes, he was yes, he graduated from Princeton, and yes, he has all these degrees and long years in service. We need to remember that Robert Mueller was the FBI director from the 4th of September 2001 to the 4th of September 2013.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of bad things have happened in that time frame, including a Clinton Foundation investigation that should have led to prosecutions and convictions and to shutting the Clinton Foundation down.
Well, let's start with week one. We had September 11th. That was the first bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't make it a week. but seriously, there's a lot here in Robert Mueller, while Robert Mueller was head of the FBI, and obviously the FBI is a gigantic organization, but we don't like to think, it's not like, for example, to put the shoe on a different foot, we say about General Mattis, well, the Defense Department's massive, and how can I be responsible for that stuff in Niger? I mean, there are lots of countries who've got people everywhere. No, you're the head of the Defense Department. The buck stops there. And similarly, you're the head of the FBI. The FBI is an unusual organization. It is supposed to be apolitical. It holds enormous power. Frankly, over the long life of the FBI, we go back to J. Edgar Hoover, we can ask ourselves, is the FBI under effective control, and should it be placed under better control? But when we think about Robert Mueller leading this investigation, right, the man who succeeded Robert Mueller as head of the FBI was James Comey. The two are joined at the hip. And the notion that Robert Mueller should be given free rein in the way that he was given free rein, selected by yet another person, Rod Rosenstein, who we will explain in depth, is conflicted up the wazoo for things that I believe he and Mueller and Comey did not catch. Mm-hmm. We need to understand what's going on in context. And the President of the United States is a tough hombre. He's somebody who's been through some very difficult, challenging, complex transactions in one of the toughest industries, and two of the toughest industries on earth, or three, you could say. Real estate in New York City is pretty tough. Entertainment, very tough. Finance, extremely tough. I mean, this is not somebody who's, just walking down the street and became the designated survivor president of the United States. I mean, this is a guy who's been around. And I think, enough is enough. When we see the kind of political packing that went into this team of Robert Mueller's, now we see leaks, first to CNN, then to the Wall Street Journal, now out through Zero Hedge. I mean, coming from the prosecutorial team. We'll get into this in some depth. This is not the first time that Robert Mueller has had cases where important details have leaked into the public domain in advance of trials. And that is not something you're supposed to do.
He just looks suspicious in that photo, doesn't he?
Nice mug. So if we go to the next link, this leaked out in August, and this is in Vanity Fair, that paragon of investigative journalism. I mean,
wait a minute. Did Kurt Eichenwald write this?
This is Felix's brother, Craig. But we have a lot of puff pieces coming out, a lot of rumors and innuendo coming out, and I think it's important to understand that we're talking about potentially a situation where insiders who did not expect Donald Trump to win. The Democrats certainly did not expect Donald Trump to win. Even some Republicans didn't expect Donald Trump to win. What is going on here with this Mueller investigation? Is this a relitigation of an election result that the never-Trump Republicans and certainly the Democrats, the Clinton and Obama Democrats, did not want to see happening? And if so, we'll get into some depth. Is this a gross abuse of power? Going back, we look at the Obama administration. I forget who said it was a scandal-free administration. Now,
I think it was
happen
Barack
to know
Obama who said that, and he was lying.
Right? Yeah. Well, there's a surprise. But I happen to have had the great pleasure to spend some time with James Rosen, who is a very decent human being, a gifted investigative journalist, a decent soul, and the powers, the mighty powers of the executive branch, the investigative bureaucracy, were sick not only on him but on his parents, on his family, etc. And there are rumors that published in the press. I'm not saying Mueller did this, but under the Obama administration, that members of Congress and the Senate were spied upon. Perhaps the Supreme Court was spied upon. We don't really know what James Clapper and the investigative apparatus, the NSA may have been doing to spy on journalists, government officials, rivals, business rivals. We don't know
have
any
some
of that.
idea, of course. We've spoken with Cheryl Atkinson, and she talks about how some of the lengths they went to spy on her, to hack her, really
Right.
malicious. It wasn't just passive, wiretapping, as the president calls it. It was active measures to really screw up her digital life.
Right. So if we go to the next slide, the next link rather, we see this came out, look at the time, 11 a.m. Saturday morning. It was updated, but it came out.
Wait a minute now. See, I know you don't put much stock in this, but some of our numerology-minded people will find an 11/11 release to be something.
Right. So this leaked out to CNN.
Oop.
And if we go to the next slide.
So this was the fact that the first charges are being filed is what was
Right.
leaked there.
And this is out almost immediately after Robert Mueller sends a message. He's deadly serious.
How is this guy even allowed to be the special prosecutor? There's all this information that's come out that he was involved in the uranium scandal. He flew there with a uranium sample.
We'll get to that in some depth in a second. So this article is a puff piece, and yet another puff piece in the New Yorker. Mm-hmm. We go to the next link. Oop, I'll get rid of that thing somehow.
I think it wants me to pay.
Really?
Keep reading. View features.
Well, anyway, if you can't, don't do that. But this is an article in the Washington Post by the person who put together the special counsel statute, saying that Trump could definitely get rid of Mueller. That the conflict. Greg Jarrett over at Fox, a lawyer, has been through this in some depth. Because Mueller and Comey have deep pre-existing relationships, because both have a lot to cover up here. This selection is, and because the man who's selected, I would argue Rod Rosenstein has major league conflicts and things that he was, or people around him will want covered up. I think Trump would be entirely in his right to disband this thing. Now, that's a different set of links.
Sorry.
We want to go to, yeah.
Is that the first one?
That's, keep going. You wanted that one?
Okay.
All right. Now, we're now learning who actually paid for what and when did they pay it.
Who paid for what and when did they pay for it?
Right. And so the issue here, of course, is I have had some experience in business, commissioning consulting reports, paying for accounting studies, paying for legal studies, etc. I'm not involved in politics. And I've never paid $500,000 to anybody for a speech or $60 million to anybody for a book. Mm-hmm. But perhaps the Clintons are in this zone where they have different prices. A meal that should cost you and me $200, they'll pay $25,000 for, and a book, a speech that maybe you pay somebody $10,000 for, they'll charge $500,000. But we now understand that this dossier may have cost anywhere. Some are saying $6 million, some are saying $9 million. Somebody just recently said $12 million. And now here's the important question for Donald Trump and Seb Gorka and Steve Bannon and the others who are honest and thinking about this. How did this taxi fare escalate? Some in the Democratic Party are trying to suggest that Paul Singer spent a lot of money via the Washington Free Beacon to create this Russian fantasy tale of what may have happened, allegedly happened over in Russia. Right?
That would be a good title for a book as well, What May Have Happened.
Right. So one needs, now that the bank records may be forthcoming, one needs to trace not only the total amount of money, but how did that spending evolve? And how much of that spending, crucially, how much of that spending occurred after Donald Trump was declared the victor on Wednesday morning, early in the morning in November, about a year ago? How much of the spending by Fusion GPS occurred prior to that moment, and then day by day, week by week, and month by month, how much did the spending occur after? Then, and only then, when you have that information, can you go back and think about the unmasking and think about, was this a coordinated effort by people like John Brennan, people close to the president, and others who realized that against, they thought they had this election locked.
Yeah.
And against every expectation, Wednesday morning, early that morning, as Barron sleepily tried to stay awake while his father was giving his speech, early that morning, those people were in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And they had to do everything they could to try to bury the truth about what was happening, what did happen, in fact, not simply between January 20th, 2009, but between Election Day 2008 forward. They had to bury all of that. And
2008, okay.
Right after the election,
yeah.
We'll get into what I'm talking about with Hillary Clinton's, defrauding the public about the true state of the Clinton Foundation, and et cetera. But this is a very important thing, to understand exactly how much money was being paid, and then how did it get paid? I mean, the spectacle of all of a sudden the three blind mice, Hillary, John Podesta, Podfather, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, are saying, "Oh, I don't know who paid for this dossier. I mean, it's only $9 million. I mean,
and
why
you
should
don't think that was a urination surcharge, the $9 million?
But Eric Trump actually made the point very, very astutely, and I believe this to be the case, that the Trumps are careful. Rich people are generally pretty careful with their money, and especially rich people who do deals for themselves and, are in a competitive business the way the Trumps are. The notion that the former leader of the Democratic Party, the person who wanted to be the commander-in-chief, run the free world, had no clue, who actually paid for $12 million worth of stuff. And it's not like the Clintons. I mean, it's rumored they might be worth $250 million. If you're only worth $250 million, which is a lot of money.
Sounds like a lot to me.
I mean, you're going to care about $12 million, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, it's not like they paid for it, right? So the question of...
I think no matter what you're worth, you're going to care about $12 million. It's $12 million.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
I mean, think about that. $12 million. What does that dossier look like? I mean, it's like, how many pages? What's $12 million about it?
It's only 35 pages, supposedly. It's just, it's incredible.
People should keep in mind that the original Terminator movie, I think, cost $6 million. So
there you go.
You could have written a whole script about Donald Trump's trip to Russia and made a reenactment with a CG Donald Trump, and even had fake video of that happening for $12 million.
Not to mention, I just read Mark Stein's latest column, which is not the link I gave you. That the Blair Witch Project cost $25,000 and made
He must be watching this show, because I reference that all the time.
All right. Well, let's keep going to the next one, which is, you're out of order there, I think.
Oh, am I?
Oh, yeah, there we go. This just came as well. Now, what's going on here with CNN and the Mueller probe? You know,
Well-
CNN, I would argue, has been hopelessly discredited. Now, this
Yeah.
is an area where Donald Trump is 1,000,000% correct.
They are
That,
fake
you know,
news.
I will now break a little bit of news without saying who it was. But there were only 2 people I went to, credible people, big organizations, with the details of the Clinton Foundation scandal, who spiked the story, in my view. One was at CNN, and another group of people at CNN, and one was at the New York Times. So what is going on here with the CNN getting this information out of the Mueller investigation? That is absolutely not the way it's supposed to work. What is going on with these ties here between GPS Fusion and CNN and these writers? What is going on here? I mean, this is
think
not the way
getting
it's
paid.
supposed to work. It's not the way it's supposed to work.
Charles, had you ever heard of Fusion GPS prior to this whole
No.
situation? Like, what the hell are those guys doing? Fusion GPS, it's such a weird name. GPS is the global positioning system. It's got nothing to do with that, obviously, but, you know, George Webb spoke quite a bit about Fusion GPS. They're, I guess, a political operative firm along the lines of the things that Dr. Jerome Corsi has spoken with us about.
Right. You see, I think, you know, there's a difference between doing research, you know, really looking or scouring available information and you know, not breaking into people's
Well, that's
homes.
what you're doing. Is
I hope that's what I'm
open
doing,
source and
Yeah, there's a difference between research and manufacturing information
Yes,
in
fiction
an attempt,
writing.
in an attempt to destroy somebody.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's one thing for one competitor to do that to somebody else, you know, for the pick the, what is it, the New England Patriots to do it against the New York Giants or whatever.
Deflategate.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing. And that's reprehensible behavior when you're manufacturing negative information and sending it into the public domain. But when our own government is doing it, you know, this is not, the issue here is not, they're trying to conflate it. The issue is not, you know, did Hillary Clinton's campaign do this? The issue is what elements of the executive branch and other branches of government, after Trump won, used U.S. taxpayer resources in an attempt to undo an election result. That is a far more serious set of issues, and that's one that Congress must investigate. I call on Chuck Grassley to think seriously about this. I call on, I think it's Ron DeSantis in the House and Trey Gowdy. This is, you know, that's the issue here. It's not, oh, you know, campaigns will fight against one another. No. What is the degree to which the Obama administration and the deep state were so shocked by the prospect that we now see unfolding of an independent president, not beholden to either party, not beholden for money to anybody, having control and placing the deep state under effective regulation? You know, that could be what this is all about here. And, you know, more power to Donald Trump and his people for trying. But we need to help people frame the debate, get the Department of Justice, get the IRS back under control. And as we'll tell you in a few minutes, step by step, there's a simple way to do that.
You know, it's interesting what you've brought up because they did just manufacture this story and push it out. And we are seeing this echoed in what's happening here. The detractors of Crowdsource the Truth have just made up nonsense and they push it out. It's like it's a new technique that they can do. I mean, you know, we've heard about the Smith-Mundt Act where they're using propaganda and suddenly that's legal. It's just make up any old story and keep saying it. We've heard Maxine Waters, we've heard Dianne Feinstein. When they started that hearing to investigate, they said it's a foregone conclusion that Russia hacked. I was thinking, well, what kind of investigation starts with a conclusion?
Right.
Makes no sense.
And I would draw a stark contrast between Watergate and this. Watergate was a case where Republicans did resist initially, but came a moment and Republicans said, you know, this is behavior we can't stand, and Republicans and Democrats jointly got to the bottom, and ultimately Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace. I mean, that was actually a good moment in American history, I would argue.
Yeah, but I would argue that they never got to the bottom of it. He resigned specifically to prevent them from getting to the bottom of it. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, now that we're getting to Watergate, do you see any irony in Donald Trump being the president now associated with the release of these JFK files? It seems like JFK was the last president to openly challenge the deep state in the way that we're discussing it. No one's done that since JFK, and now Trump is doing it, and they're going to become sort of linked in that regard.
Well, again, I'm not an historian or an expert on JFK, but JFK stuff. But I think one thing I would say about it is that back in that time frame in 1963, there was no question that America and the West were vulnerable to a Soviet Union that was very powerful, to the communist Chinese operation and their various satellites. There was no question that there was a real possibility of another world war, and great deference was given to our defense establishment. And indeed, the mix of spending, of government spending, was far more heavily weighted then towards defense than it is today. I mean, people don't understand. You go back and look at the numbers of total government spending, federal, state, local, including military. The military piece was gigantic. It was like a third or so in 1963.
And what is it now?
Now I think it might be 10%, 12%, 14%. Wow. It's way down.
But aren't we still 50 times more military and defense spending than the next closest?
Our defense spending in total is gigantic. And of course, those figures are not necessarily reliable around the world because people like to disguise how much they actually spend. We openly declare a large amount. So I don't really know the answer. But let's stay focused, though, on this track.
Sure.
If we go down to the next link. All right. On the subject of Bob Mueller and people on his team having a history of lying, of using the press, Sidney Powell is a lady, a fine lady, is the author of this book. When I had my radio show with the Washington Times, I interviewed her. She does interviews. I implore you to get her on this show or on one of your shows. Read this book. This will take you through precisely how it is alleged Bob Mueller and members of his current team on the special counsel, how they abused the law to try to win convictions in cases having to do with Enron and Senator Stevens, who some would argue was unfairly prosecuted. This is it's important background. Most people are not aware of this. It's well researched. It's well written. It is a little bit of a technical book, but I congratulated Sydney the first time I met her by saying that it reads really well. It's not a very deep, dense book that's impenetrable. It's a book you can get and understand, and I implore our crowdsourcers to consider reading, because when you read this book, you'll see why I feel as strongly as I do that Bob Mueller should resign yesterday.
And Charles, it's really interesting. I'm so glad that we're doing this and that alternative media is really starting to be noticed by a larger audience, because people, I think the tendency is, you start hearing a lot about Bob Mueller. I guarantee there's tons of people who never heard of him before. And like, oh, special counsel, looks good in a suit, standing up tall, must be the guy. And they think he's great. But then you hear about what he did with Enron and what he did with 9/11.
That's what this book is all about.
He's bad news.
So if we keep going. All right, this is something I happened to notice in preparing for the website today.
Oh, this was a wonderful broadcast.
Yeah, and some guy named Jason Goodman and King James got together and did this. You know this guy?
Oh, I know him well. He's a good friend. Now, Charles, I know you're not a big Bitcoin person, but this Bitcoin gold thing has just come about, and I was checking earlier this morning. Bitcoin was at a phenomenal, right now, it's $5,998.79 for one Bitcoin.
Right. So what I believe is going on, I don't fully understand Bitcoin, but what I believe is going on is that there is a gigantic excess of money looking for the scarce few places to invest. So that we have an imbalance between the amount of wealth that's out there and the safe places or sensible places to put it, which is exacerbated by central bank stupidity, lowering interest rates way down on the ground, inflating the value of everything, and deficit spending around the world. So we're in a very unusual place. I have yet to hear a convincing case as to why Bitcoin holds value. I did hear Peter Thiel make the argument that it is more expensive to mine one Bitcoin than it is to mine an ounce of gold. I'd love to see that explanation.
Yeah,
in
that
some
doesn't
depth.
seem-
That can make a little bit more sense. But the difference between Bitcoin and gold is that gold was valuable 5,000 years ago, and Bitcoin may or may not, hold its allure over time. So, as also gold is cheaper per ounce than Bitcoin.
Well, you can't really weigh a Bitcoin, but
Well, right.
I'd be interested
Per
to...
unit.
Right, per unit. I'd be interested to see you learn more about cryptocurrency. I don't know anything about it either, but it just seems to be defying every expectation. It just keeps going up and up and up.
For another day. But this I brought up only because you had
Yes.
gotten into Frank Giustra,
Right.
and there I think, and we'll get into this in some depth, the uranium one, the connections to Frank Giustra's various involvements up in Canada, the Canadian government's failures to regulate Giustra, his companies, and the various, in quotes, foundations are glaring failures. And I have a shout out now to the Foreign Minister of Canada. You are, by all accounts, possibly a Clinton supporter. You're a Rhodes Scholar. You're a smart person. You were a journalist for the Financial Times. You're rising through the ranks of the Canadian political scene. Now you're the foreign minister. You have as a top job the idea that you're going to get NAFTA going. And you need to focus on what actually happened in Canada involving the Clinton Foundation starting in 2002 forward, when Canadian citizens and Canadian foundations began, in theory, sending money across our northern border, your southern border, into our various accounts, in theory to fight HIV/AIDS at a time where the Clinton Foundation was not authorized for that purpose. You can help here. And if you don't help, and if you obstruct, it's going to be a very dangerous thing for Canada.
I think you could actually write a trilogy of books, Charles. The first would be what happened with a question mark.
Right.
Then you could have what may have happened, and then you could have what actually happened, and each of them would reveal different aspects of what happened.
That's a good thought there, Jason. Thanks for that one. So, Michael Goodwin is a highly respected, I believe, award-winning columnist. He calls here for Mueller to resign. I agree with him. I may not agree precisely for the same reasons, but I think Mueller should resign. If we go to the next one, here we discover, this is one I just noticed, here we discover that Obama's campaign paid almost $1 million to this large law firm, Perkins Coie.
Oh, those guys.
And Perkins Coie are the one who, the notion that this relatively young lawyer, Mark Elias, who's I think the campaign finance expert, would not know that it's extremely unusual to pay whatever the number is, $3, $6, $9, $12 million to Fusion GPS for some purpose. It's not like, when you announce that you're going to run a campaign, that gives you a license to say, buy a yacht for $1 billion that's only worth $100,000. There comes a point when you overpay for something,
that it becomes super obvious.
Well, you're bribing somebody, right? You don't, in the competitive world, you don't go out and take somebody who's providing a service and pay them 1,000 times more than they should normally get, for a good reason. You're doing that to bribe them. So,
it's interesting, this Perkins Coie, I think Lola is dropping the mic somewhere on Twitter because she has spoken quite a bit about Perkins Coie. What else were those guys involved in? Something with the MIS department, I think. Those guys in Chicago that were...
Bob Bauer is Perkins Coie, and he was the White House counsel until that person flew over to Hawaii to get the birth certificate.
Oh, the fake birth certificate.
And then and I have no comment on that one, but when this person returned to the White House, Bob Bauer unexpectedly and suddenly resigned. And that has never really been explained. It's a little bit unusual. He was in there. Why would you resign? You're the White House counsel.
Perhaps we should call him and ask him.
I'm sure he'll tell us.
What happened?
Exactly. So we keep going. We're almost there.
Whoops. I'm sure I must have missed the video here.
Yeah, this is that. This is something, if you leave the link up, this is, I have had the pleasure of being on Jeanine Pirro's show a number of times. She is a sharp sharp person who happens to be a lady. And this is a must-watch segment, a must-share. Jeanine Pirro gets it. She's going to the heart of the issue. If we're going to be investigating suspicious wire transfers, if we're going to be investigating failures to register, then there is no better case upon which we should concentrate than the Clinton Foundation and its nest of crooked charities around the world. But the issue is not what I've been harping on in the past solely, this is a fraud. The real issue for Donald Trump, now that his team has found its feet and is seeping into the IRS, seeping into the Department of Justice, you have the ability to go into the records and understand why investigations were turned off. You know, this was the subject of the Clinton Foundation was the subject of intense focus, in theory, starting in February 2001. Yet, over the course of a 4-year investigation, nothing happened.
That's the fourth book.
Right. Nothing happened. Right? So at a later moment, I would strongly encourage people to listen carefully to Jeanine Pirro, listen to what she has to say, and circulate this around to the crowdsourced group.
Now, I don't mean to distract, but someone in the comments here has just said that Mueller enabled the Boston bombings and then covered it up. I don't know if we want to touch on that.
Well, that's a subject that I have brought up in the past, that, you know, as I understand that what happened with the Tsarnaev brothers is that the Russians came and they said, you know, we know a little bit about people like the Tsarnaev brothers, and we're a little bit surprised that they live in the United States and they're traveling back and forth to some dodgy places. You just might want to take a look at this, you know? And apparently we put our crack team of Elmer Fudd and Mr. Magoo on it, and they went and they interviewed these guys. There's nothing here, you know, and then we saw what happened. And so that's a serious subject. I mean, I don't think we yet truly understand, and I think we could very much learn by going back over this ground of saying, you know, when did the Russians, who among the Russians notified us? What was our reaction? And, you know, why did we let these people slip out of our do we yet know what actually happened there? I mean, did we really round up all of the people associated with the Tsarnaev incident? And that's one, you know, where...
Or what their motive was, how they got all that equipment and everything.
Right.
Seems remarkably similar to the bombs that were used right out here in Chelsea by those Egyptian guys.
Right. So now we've discussed some of the current events. I think it'd be a good idea to jump into, we've got a 17-page slide presentation. I don't know if you could pull up the first page of that.
Get that right here.
We'll start with this.
Oh.
Or not.
Sorry. There we go.
All right, now before we...
I don't know why it keeps
killing
doing
me.
that. There we go.
All right. I'd like just to dwell a little bit on this disclaimer. And I put this up here to say that I have done all this work exercising my First Amendment rights to speak on a topic. I'm not holding myself out as a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, an accountant, because I'm not an accountant, a policy expert.
You're kind of a policy expert.
No, I'm just a concerned citizen. That said, what I'm doing for you here, in particular Mr. President and Seb and the team, is I'm pointing you to places that you would have the ability, with your own professional advisors, to confirm everything that I'm saying here and do more than that. And rather than take today people through 80 slides, which we can do and will do in some depth, I thought that I would do today is make the case both for the prosecution of the Clinton Foundation and all its affiliates and all the significant donors, but also for the disbanding of the Mueller investigation and the investigation of those, perhaps, who are on the Mueller team over what we're going to cover now in this presentation. So
now, Charles, do you feel like the moment that we're at, the pressure that's on, let's presume for a moment that Mueller is running interference for conspirators in a vast, some-wing conspiracy. Do you think that some of the actions that are happening in terms of handing down this indictment, that it just seems like there's pressure on them now where they're doing things to react because they're
Right.
the egg timer is about to go ding and their goose is going to be cooked.
Right. I mean, I think that the people who've been behaving in this fashion, right, if we go back to 1989 or so, in theory, they know what is happening, right? Because they have access to gigantic computers and resources and unregulated funds and tons of people. So they really know the truth. And they must know that they've been able to bamboozle the general public and that the general public is very gullible, right? The question here is not, I mean, victory is not handing down an indictment. Plenty of times people indict somebody and fail to win a conviction, or even if they win a conviction, that conviction is overturned on appeal. So the standard is not, can Bob Mueller indict somebody? I think there's a famous saying that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich.
Lionel would say it. Yeah.
Right, and so on the question of what could come next, and I don't generally like to speculate that much, but there are rumors that Manafort may be indicted. There are suspicions that, if the reports in the press are true, which they may or may not be true, that Jared Kushner has had some difficulties getting forms filled out properly. Now he's a very wealthy person and his family is wealthy, so it's not surprising that a very wealthy person with a lot of business interests would have difficulties completing the very detailed forms that I understand apply when you get a high security clearance position in this country.
Why difficulties? What do you mean?
Well, if you got 1,500 investments, I'm just making this number up, and
you can't remember them all.
Well, it's not so much that, and they ask specific questions about every single investment, how much debt does it have, from what bank, et cetera. It's possible that you could get some of that stuff wrong.
Got it.
Right. But anyway, this disclaimer is an important thing to keep in mind. Now, if we go to the first page, after the disclaimer, okay. Did you skip? No, that's
Sorry, this one?
No. Page 3, you got it. All right. We have 5 avenues that need to be considered by President Trump and his team, okay? The first one is the area of illegally organized and operated presidential foundations. Now, on this slide, I simply mention the Clinton and the Barack H. Foundation, Barack H. Obama Foundation. But there are other presidential foundations, the George H.W. Bush, the George W. Bush, maybe, who knows, the Carter Foundation. My quick pass through those 5, the only one that I think has cleanest hands is the Carter operation, because they, to me, seem to have respected the distinction between forming a foundation to house the presidential records in a presidential library, then having an institute, a separate institute, to do whatever he likes to do around the world, ensuring that elections are proper and this and that, and then yet a third one in the UK to have one constituted under UK law. That seems to be the only one that is not muddled up and messed.
And to be clear, you don't like Jimmy Carter. You're no fan of Jimmy Carter.
No. I'm glad he's back in Georgia.
So it's interesting to me, we've always seen that photo of the 5 living presidents, which is maybe the biggest collection of simultaneously alive presidents ever. No. Oh, well, it's a big one. Carter is physically removed. The other 4 are visually connected in terms of their close proximity to each other. And that's body language to me.
Right.
He's like, I don't want to be near these scumbags.
So we start with these presidential foundations, and we'll get in some depth in this presentation as to why specifically the Clinton Foundation, there's no question that has been a fraud from the inception in my mind. And then the Barack H. Foundation, Barack H. Obama Foundation seems to be emulating the crooked Clinton Foundation. Mm-hmm. But the next case for Donald Trump and his people, there are a large number of donors to these foundations. We pick on, for example, Bill and Melinda Gates. There are other large foundations, the Bloomberg Foundation, things like that. You take Gates for a second. Now, I've never met the person. Oh, I did run into him once in the green room, but he.
What did he say to you?
It was like, he gave me the dirty look.
Did he?
Yeah.
He knows you're.
No. He was. This was in something else, but he just was involved, and didn't expect somebody to walk right into the green room, and I didn't expect anyone else to be in the green room. So anyway.
You're like, get the hell out of my green room.
Well, I had to do so anyway. But the point is, if you think about the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates, he was basically scolded, much as many of these younger rich people get scolded by the press and academia for not being generous enough. He also, under the Clinton administration, was under assault by the Justice Department.
Bill Gates was.
Well, the Microsoft.
Oh, Microsoft, right.
And in addition, internationally afterwards, Microsoft was under assault by, I think, the EU.
Right.
So there is a cynical bone in my body that would say, you know, maybe the reason that Bill and Melinda got together and did this foundation was to blunt some of the criticism that they were getting. Mm-hmm. And when they realized at that stage they were phenomenally wealthy, whenever it was that they actually put this Gates Foundation together, it's not that they needed another 10 billion. So somebody may have gone to them and said, hey, you have all this stock in a company that's worth a tremendous amount of money. The cost to you is pennies per share because you're a founder, right? So by transferring a block of the stock into a foundation, you get a tremendous tax deduction, which you can use to lower your cash taxes on all the other income that you may have.
So they're actually making money from this.
You're getting some cash back. And if you set this thing up so that you can still control the Gates Foundation, all you're really doing is taking paper and putting it from this hand to this hand. And you're getting money back from the US government. And you can go and try all these things that you say are great, but it's not going to be the worst economic decision for you, and it'll also change the way you're viewed. Now, this is not a new approach. I mean, that's the Rockefeller Foundation, which is more or less the same idea. One could argue, Mike Bloomberg, I think, has done fantastic charitable work, but there are others who, at the big banks, look at Bloomberg companies, look at the mini scandal that was sort of quelled over whether Bloomberg reporters were delving into the Bloomberg terminal transmissions back and forth to clients when they shouldn't have been, and that's something they really shouldn't be doing. So there's a whole exercise here, and it's done for us already because the Clinton Foundation has provided some of the information of cross-checking who, and the IRS could do this in a heartbeat, who are the donors, the US donors for starters, from private foundations who have given money over time to the Clinton Foundation, and what purposes did the donors claim they were giving the money to the Clinton Foundation, and was the Clinton Foundation authorized for those purposes? So
I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah, not so much. And to pick on an area we will get into a little bit later, but just to tease it now, there's a distinction between giving money to the Clinton Foundation for its operating purposes and giving money for an endowment. Now, the records of the Clinton Foundation that are purposefully, in my mind, withheld from the public show no donations recorded as going for an endowment through the period when an endowment was indeed, in theory, raised and given to the National Archives on November 18th, 2004.
I know this is a stupid question, but remind us, what is the difference there? What is the endowment supposed to be for?
Okay, so when you raise money for a foundation that's supposed to be a library,
right,
you can say, hey, Jason, listen, this year we're operating the library and our budget is $6 million. You want to chip in $1,000 to help us keep the lights on in the library. That's an operating expense.
Right.
An endowment typically is for capital purposes. I'd say, Jason, listen, I don't want to ask you every year for $1,000. Instead, I'd like you to give me $25,000. We're going to put that in a diversified fund, prudently managed, and the income from that fund will be used solely for our authorized tax-exempt purposes. There's a double problem. The first problem is, you can't invade that fund to use it to buy an apartment in Park Avenue South, or pay for a wedding, or to pay for political.
But they did that.
Well, I don't know if they did that, but you can't. They certainly invaded the endowment. I don't know for what purpose.
How do we know that?
Well, because there's people say they gave money for an endowment in the period through 2004. I believe Saudi Arabia gave on June 28th, 2004, is my estimate, $10 million for an endowment. Yet at the end of the year, there's no sum for an endowment on the Clinton Foundation books. Indeed, there's only by about, I want to say 2011 or 12, the endowment reaches $250,000. A lot of people gave money through the filings I've seen, for an endowment.
250,000 sounds like nothing compared to the contributions
Well,
made.
Many millions went in,
Right.
but there's nothing shown on the books for an endowment. And that's a technical crime. It doesn't sound that bad. It's a really bad crime, right? When you raid an endowment, because you're a fiduciary, you're a trustee, your first duty is to this institution. When you start holding yourself out as being authorized to do things that you're not authorized to do, so you're cheating on the operating fund, you're cheating on the endowment fund, you're doing this across state lines, you're using mail, you're using telephones, you're using digital media, you're doing it internationally. That's a gigantic category of, you're a lawyer doing this, okay? I mean, you are in serious trouble.
See, part of the thing I
Normally.
think that kind of eludes the average American about all this is that it's not like somebody's walking up to somebody with a gun and saying, give me your $200. They're like, oh, that's armed robbery, that's a crime. Like these other things, it's complicated lawyer and accountant stuff, so people don't necessarily realize the severity of the criminal activity.
I would actually paint it a slightly different picture. It's one thing if you go into a poor neighborhood, you know, where the police are too scared to go into the poor neighborhood and everybody's beating up and robbing everybody else up. Okay, that's bad. But when you go into the White House and the Department of Treasury and the CIA and the FBI and judges and Congress, right, and all these people with fancy law degrees who are paid $500,000 to give speeches and tens of millions to write books,
Yeah.
holding themselves out as people who should be venerated, who are on the public take, who are getting pension payments and
that's awful.
security details, that is an area where there should be no leniency of any kind. You're not talking in Bill and Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. You're not talking about rubes. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about people who brag about how smart they are, who allow publications, in the case of Hillary Clinton, to go on and on. This was one of the smartest female lawyers in the world.
Yeah.
So,
Most qualified person to ever run for president.
not to mention one of the best secretaries of state ever, right? I mean, not like that Jefferson dude.
Maybe
I mean,
if you're the king of Morocco.
yeah, I mean, what did that Jefferson dude ever do anyway? So, well, let's keep going to, there's three new elements that I think Donald Trump and Seb Gorka and Steve Bannon need to really focus on.
Still on this page.
Yeah. So, we will be getting into some considerable depth into Ron Boxey and the drug distribution fraud. But in essence, to just put a high-level pass through it, what was going on, it seems, is that this company, Ron Boxey, which was publicly traded in India at a low valuation, had managed over the course of decades to make the United States its largest market, providing generic drugs into the United States, okay? And along comes, frankly now a crook, Rajat Gupta, who was then the managing director of McKinsey, a big consulting firm. Along comes this crook and says, you know, there's a way for you to protect your position in the United States. There's this senator, Hillary Clinton. She's got a daughter who needs a job, is working at McKinsey, and is interested in this whole HIV/AIDS area. And you got this president who's got bills to pay, right? So why don't we get Bill Clinton to sign an agreement with Ranbaxy and agree to promote the sale of generic Ranbaxy drug products? And why don't we have that signed in October of 2003, at a time when Bill Clinton was not an officer of the Clinton Foundation, when the Clinton Foundation absolutely was not authorized to do that thing, and where it is strictly prohibited for a foundation to endorse and promote, you know, the business development for any company, let alone a generic HIV/AIDS manufacturer, which it turns out, it takes 10 years to figure this out, but by August of 2004, it turns out that Ranbaxy has to admit that they have never tested in their long history any of their drugs. Even though at this point, it's almost, I think, $1 billion company.
Wow.
Have never been tested. They've been inventing
How
the
can
result.
they do that?
Well, they get contract test facilities to write reports that nobody checks. Does that sound familiar? Like a foundation that gets
Wow.
a crooked accounting firm to write reports that nobody checks because Lois Lerner is in the appropriate bolt hole in the IRS, and some other Clinton ally or Bush ally may be in the Department of Justice. So This drug distribution fraud is really something that all of us, we in this country in 2017, we're all, those of us who've been around, are in a place where we face the reality that we're all going to be taking pills of some kind or another. How do we control? There are a lot of older people around the world. How do we control the manufacture of all these pills? This isn't a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. When you go into the pharmacy and you pick up your box of pills for the month, how do you know that each pill was actually made properly to standard? How do you know that the testing firm has actually done the job right? How do you know that these pills, which are expensive, when somebody pays for them, aren't doctored in some way? That there isn't,
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, as it were. So this is a serious area, and where the alarm bells really rise is that one of the people who led the investigation, which I believe took too long into this, was Rod Rosenstein.
Into Ranbaxy.
Okay.
And so Ranbaxy, you said, is their largest market is the U.S. They're selling generic drugs into the U.S. and they're untested?
The U.S. and they have been spanked so many different times. Sometimes you end up with a company that's impossible to control, and I think that's the case of Ranbaxy. They were spanked really hard by the FDA. They had to pay by the Justice Department. They had to pay a $500 million fine. I would argue they should have been shut down entirely.
Yeah.
And the people who perpetrated this should be rotting in the worst prison on earth.
Right.
They shouldn't be murdered. The death penalty. They should have to live out their lives, being given a daily diet of pills, wondering whether
what's in it.
Yeah, what's in it.
And so Bill Clinton went and got in business with these guys.
Absolutely, and still defends his association with Ranbaxy. And it's not just Ranbaxy. There are other generic manufacturers. And this is a whole area, take one of the world's health experts, Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah.
Writes these crazy books, and writes these theses, gets these degrees from Oxford and Columbia and elsewhere. I mean, there's some real focus and attention that Donald Trump and the business people around Donald Trump need to give to the whole healthcare area. It's not insurance. It's not getting pieces of paper that say you're covered. It's why is the cost of healthcare so high in this country? That's what we need to focus on. One of the reasons is that crooked companies like Ranbaxy are allowed to do what they do, and that no one's held to account here. So the whole area of what was really happening on this whole mess needs to be examined. And Rod Rosenstein, I would argue, has a conflict here. And Bob Mueller has a conflict here because the investigations into Ranbaxy started in around 2006. I believe the FBI raided Ranbaxy on Valentine's Day, 2006 or 7 or 8, somewhere in there.
In India?
In the United States. Right? And why did it take so long to get to the bottom of what was going on in Ranbaxy? Could it have been that they knew prior to the 2008 election and they didn't want this to seep out and compromise the ability of Barack Obama to win the election? Could it be that they went slow? Could it be that they waited until May of 2013 to settle or to get the thing done because they wanted to make sure that Barack Obama was reelected? I mean, these are the types of tough questions that I think we need to get the answers to on the inside, and Donald Trump and his people have the ability to get that answer. Now, the fourth strand here, we have talked in the past about laureate education. This is a saga that goes all the way back to 2006. Late in 2006, I believe, or sometime in 2006, they began the process of trying to take this, I would argue, basket case company that is engaged in a crazy business idea, running for-profit universities around the world in competition with the many excellent universities that are already out there. They orchestrated this project to take the thing private at the peak of the last bubble in the 2006-2007 timeframe. It closed in August of 2007. This is a transaction that involves a laundry list of investors. I'm sure there are many reputable people involved at the firms I'm now going to list out, but Stephen Cohen was very much involved with SAC Capital in this transaction. Goldman Sachs was involved as a lender and an investor. KKR was involved. All these people,
KKR.
There are many good people at those firms. But this is a transaction that should never happen in the first place, right? The idea that we sit here and we say, we've got these many public universities, many private universities that are endowed. Let's also add into the mix, when campuses fail that are operated in the not-for-profit land, let's allow some fly-by-night company run for much of its time by somebody who decided that college was such a great idea that he wouldn't go there.
Who was that, Bill Clinton?
No, Doug Becker.
Oh.
Who was one of the promoters. Two of the promoters of this laureate supposedly got into top schools but decided they weren't going to go there. They just wanted to be venture capitalists. And I'm not buying that story. So this is a transaction that this company, I would argue, should have gone bankrupt long ago. All right. Instead, what happened is that it went private. Lots of fees were made. It struggled in the crisis. They needed to put lipstick on the pig, as it were. So they made a decision by around April, May 2010 to enter into what I think might have been a 5-year contract, overpaying Bill Clinton for part-time work, what turned out to be $17.6 million. None of the timing, the consequences of any of this, the advantages that doing so may have brought to the firms involved. None of this is disclosed in any of the Clinton Foundation filings for any period, and that all needs to be. And why wasn't this investigated? And oh, by the way, where is Laureate based? Maryland, the same place where the U.S. Attorney, Rod Rosenstein, had purview over this whole mess. Okay? This is the strand of securities frauds, the strand of, who got the passes. Why were individuals not brought to account for what happened in 2007, 8, 9? Who made the decisions either to go after people or not to go after people in this time frame? All needs to be investigated. Finally, the whole area of corruption and obstruction of justice. Peter Schweitzer kicked this whole thing off, I think, actually with Laureate, but also with lots of the whole Clinton Foundation stuff, excited my interest in really going deeply into this. His focus, to date, and the focus of lots of people, has been on the far more difficult area of pay-to-play and corruption, where you have to find motive often, than in charity fraud, where you don't have to prove intent, and where you don't have to really go on fishing expeditions. Public charities, like the Clinton Foundation, have to make public disclosures regularly, and they have to answer questions from members of the public, and certainly from the IRS and Department of Justice. So these are 5 strands here, 5 major league strands. Multiple ways, Bob Mueller, Rod Rosenstein, James Comey, the Clintons, the Obamas, are all implicated one way or another, or touched by these 5 strands of fraud. All right, and yet, what is exciting the mainstream media, and Woodward and Bernstein and all these investigators, is the leaky scandal.
The piss dossier.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, this is an area of fertile ground. Now, if we go to the next slide.
Next page.
Page 4.
There we are.
It's got a mind of its own. So the question is, we have 2 theories here, right? Mm-hmm. We have the mainstream analysis. And we don't need to flip. We'll let people do this at another time, maybe, because there's a lot here, unless you want to. There's the mainstream approach, which pictures Mueller and his team as noble crusaders, doing God's work along with Lloyd.
That's the fiction,
right? That's what you get from the mainstream press, right? Mm-hmm. As we've talked about, there are a lot of obvious conflicts, right?
Yes.
Well, let's start with the first on the right-hand side, the known record, okay? We know from the FBI vault file, right? We've been over this before. We know there's a lot of information in the public domain already concerning an investigation that seems to have started very quickly, unlike other investigations, very quickly into the Clinton Foundation and what may have actually been going on there from the day it began officially on the 23rd of October, 1997, right the way through to late 2004, early 2005. We don't have a specific end date yet on when that first set of investigations happened, but Robert Mueller was head of the FBI starting on the 4th of September 2001, so he should have had some knowledge of the Clinton Foundation stuff.
What was the nature of those investigations?
We had this whole idea that Mark Rich and others may have, in the period, say, 1989 forward, and in Rich's case, it may have gone back even further, been plundering the world, basically, and particularly the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, etc., been plundering the world, engaged in what are called privatizing transactions. There were a lot of government-controlled companies that once the world changed and the Soviet Union fell and communist China and India decided to embrace capitalism, governments started selling off companies. Now, when you do that correctly, if you've got an experienced auctioneer and you've got the time to do it, you can sell businesses for a lot of money. That was what I used to do, not for governments, but when you sell a business, if you do it properly and you're skilled, you can get top dollar for a business. You want to buy it, and you want to buy it and play people off and legitimately, and the bids come in and you get a high. If, on the other hand, you don't want to do it that way, you've got a gem over here, a gold mine, let's say, filled with gold and bitcoins and whatever else, and it's worth $20 billion.
But you just want to give it to Hillary Clinton's brother.
Right, so you schedule the auction to occur at 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day or something like that, and nobody showed up. I'll give it to them for $2. And so it's basically, in a nutshell, that's what was going on. Mm-hmm. And however, January of 2001, when it emerged that Bill Clinton had actually pardoned Mark Rich, even though Mark Rich had not fled the country, never answered for his charges, never served any time, he gets pardoned. An investigation's triggered. And we still don't know what happened actually with that investigation, but Donald Trump can find out. He could go back in, his team should be able to go back in and say, why did the Clinton Foundation investigations fizzle out? There seem to have been grand juries seated almost immediately after the investigations began. Why did those investigations not move forward? Because back then, the Clinton Foundation, certainly in 2001, was simple to understand. There had only been so many, very few, I want to say fewer than 300 cumulative contributions by mid-2001, and we know this because in the version of the Clinton Foundation filings that are on their website, you can see specific, you don't know the names, but each amount of each major donation is listed out for you. How complicated was it back then to have the G-men and women, track down each donor and say, listen, all right, when did you get the money? Where'd you send the money? How'd you send the money? And why'd you send the money? For what purpose? It's not complicated. So why wasn't Mueller, why wasn't Comey, who was the U.S. attorney beginning around January 2002, why couldn't they, with the tools they had then, why couldn't they bring this investigation home? And why didn't they notice in 2002 that Bill and Ira Magaziner were issuing these press releases claiming that these two gentlemen, Bill and Ira Magaziner, Bill Clinton, were having the Clinton Foundation engage in international activities for which it certainly wasn't authorized? Why didn't they notice any of that?
Well,
so then the next thing down is we have, at this point, in terms of thinking through why there may be conflicted motives, we have what I call the Never Trump Republicans, and the Clinton-Obama wings of the Democratic Party. They have a lot to fear here if serious people go into the files. And there are communications files. But we have tried to get, people close to me have tried to get the original application, or the applications for the Clinton Foundation to be a charity. Mm-hmm. And then any member of the public is supposed to be able to get the correspondence file between the Clinton Foundation and the IRS concerning its tax status, if there have been any questions, right? And they have refused to share that information, which you're not allowed to do. Now, you could do that when Lois Lerner is in charge of the IRS. You could do that when John Koskinen is in charge of the IRS, and when it seems like Hillary Clinton is going to be the next president of the United States.
Right.
But now you shouldn't be able to do that. And we should be able to get to the bottom of it.
Well, and of course, we just saw, I think, this past week that Koskinen is out.
Right. So that's why.
When is that taking effect?
I believe, November 12th.
A couple days before the TikTok deadline for the Clinton countdown.
Right. So November 12th, 12 November 2017 is a Sunday. And that's when his term is up. So I guess he'd probably leave by the Friday beforehand as a guest. So it's up to us, though. One of the reasons that I'm glad you and I are doing this in league with your Crowdsource the Truth people, we can't accept what the elitists are saying, and certainly what the lamestream media are saying about this investigation. Ordinary Americans have every right to expect that a presidential library, a presidential foundation will be run in strict compliance with the law. And we need to press our legislators press Chuck Grassley, press DeSantis, press Gowdy, press Sessions, press the attorneys general, press the governors. Ask the tough questions. If citizens, send this presentation link and send it to Donald Trump and ask him, why aren't you doing anything about this? You've been the President of the United States since the 20th of January, 2017. You need to bring this to account, and you need to understand that we have this deadline coming where the trustees who are listening to this, the professional advisors who are listening to it, Andrew Kessel, the chief financial officer, the various people at the Clinton Foundation, you are on notice that you have a simple choice to make. You can add to the many penalties that you will suffer by submitting, as you have to, across state lines, using either the mail, the internet, or otherwise. You could submit yet another set of fraudulent tax returns that are not complete and that omit material facts and that don't amend prior scenes. You can do all that, all right, and you're going to be in worse trouble than if you come forward now and either say, listen, Uncle, I can't do it. We're putting this into a conservatory. Yes, we screwed up, but we're not running the risk of filing another set of fraudulent tax returns. We're not doing that. We know we screwed up in the past. We don't have enough time to meet the final deadline. We'll appoint a conservator. We'll stop fundraising. That's one approach. But if you don't do that, all right, no mercy, no leniency, and an example needs to be set here. And this is as serious. This November 15th deadline is very serious. I said it was serious as a test in 2015.
What do you mean as a test?
Well, back in 2015, when I called attention to it, and in much the same way, doing a countdown clock on my site, Barack Obama was the president, and we didn't know what happened in terms of the election. We didn't know even who the candidates would be. And
for 2016.
Right, and so I did it as a test, all right, and the Clinton Foundation failed miserably.
Did they see it?
Who knows? But the point is they originally said, we don't need to refile. Then they refiled 2010, 11, 12, 13, and filed fraudulent returns for 2014 and made statements, we'll get into in a second, that are fraudulent. So they failed once in 2015. In 2016, there was no point to do it because we didn't know who was going to win the election, and we certainly knew that the IRS under Obama and the Justice Department under Obama were not going to help.
Right.
But this is a different one. Now we're November 15th, 2017. Do you feel lucky, trustees? Do you feel lucky? Because you shouldn't be feeling lucky. Now we keep going down to the very bottom on the right. Yeah. So we need to understand the truth about what happened in the election. I mean, Donald Trump didn't win by one electoral vote. He won a commanding victory. He won it spending far less money, far more effectively.
Half.
Yeah, or less than half, I think. And now Robert Mueller, we hear, has filed a sealed indictment. We'll see maybe we'll see on Monday who he was going after. But even if it's a bombshell indictment.
It seems like it would be Manafort, doesn't it? They raided his house and everything.
We needn't guess. It'll possibly Manafort. But the point is, the adjudication of that case will certainly take longer than through November 15, 2017.
Yeah.
So what Mueller needs to understand, and his people need to understand, is, just because you may make some progress, maybe against a Manafort or whoever this, doesn't mean that you are absolved into inquiries for your prior behavior into all these frauds that we've been talking about. And there are more than just these, but I thought I'd put 5 up there for Donald Trump and Seb Gorka and Steve Bannon and others to think carefully about, David Bossie and others in Sessions to think carefully about. So returning to slide 5 for a second.
That one?
No, this one, 5. All right. Let's take a second. This is a little complicated. We've done it once before, but I want to go over it again. I won't go over every step. But what we're talking about here in this charity fraud is stealing money, diverting money, raised in the names of deserving victims, either of Haiti earthquake or prior problems, natural disasters.
It's really the most despicable thing you can imagine.
Right. And it really is. And this is not something that happens by accident.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, how did that money
Whoops.
end up in my bank account? I mean, this is a long-term pattern and practice. The
Yeah.
evidence shows, and the lawyers around here can add this all up. And does this constitute racketeering or not? Is this a conspiracy? I don't know. It sure looks like one, but I'm not a lawyer. The lawyers can look at these facts and see a long pattern and practice of the Clintons standing up before the world when there's a disaster, when there's a health crisis or something, and say, you know what? We're just the people that take your money and make sure that the victims are well looked after. Just don't ask any questions.
Yeah.
This has been going on, as far as the charity is concerned, since October 23rd, 1997. Arguably, this has been a pattern and practice for the Clintons in their political life, going way back, and for others as well. But just when it comes to the charity, you say you're going to help victims, and then you do whatever you can to make sure there are no controls. And there's a record of that, right? There are, for every year where they had an audit, there's a correspondence file where the auditor will have sent a letter in to the CEO saying, you know, we saw these problems and those problems and other problems, if they did see the problems, and there'll be a reaction, you know? And the audits that the accounting firm put forth for all years are non-compliant. We'll get into some of that in a bit later. You then
know,
have this...
Charles, just to interject, we've got 951 people watching us on YouTube right now. We've got people watching on Facebook. We've got people watching on Periscope, the beloved VK social media network
12?
in Russia. I don't know. I'm not checking that right now. But what can people do individually to help bring attention to this? Let's say Seb Gorka or Donald Trump aren't watching right now.
Send them, tweet to them. Donald Trump notices his tweets. Tweet out to Seb Gorka, tweet out to Steve Bannon, tweet out to...
But tweet what?
Just say, why aren't you focused on the Clinton Foundation frauds? Are you going to prosecute the Clinton Foundation frauds?
Hashtag lock her up.
Lock them up, I'd say.
Right.
So you got a lot of money coming in. If you have a crooked charity, you skim. You know, the money's coming over to this account, but that's not the right account. So before it comes into the charity account, you steal as much money as you can and you do what you want with it because nobody's checking.
But why is that? Why are charities uniquely well suited? It seems like we're seeing a lot of crimes surrounding 501c3.
Because you see, it's classic. It's a story about human nature, right? We are quite willing to suspend our natural inclination to disbelieve when it comes to people who supposedly are doing good works. When it comes to people who won elections and are famous, you know, the standard person on the street would say, well, we all know politicians are crooked, but this is a charity. I mean, what bunch of crooks would name a crooked charity after themselves? And, you know, how come no government has actually caught them? How come the U.S. government isn't prosecuting them? If it's as bad as you say, you know, that's what we heard for 2 years, basically, until suddenly now the IRS is investigating, the FBI's been investigating, Chuck Grassley's investigating, maybe DeSantis will be investigating, and Gowdy, and governments are investigating, foreign governments are investigating. But the natural inclination at first is, oh, come on, you know, this is the president. He cares about his legacy. You know, he doesn't want to be, you know, known as one of the major league fraudsters of all time, you know. And so it's a perfect vehicle to use to deceive gullible people and to collect money from people who have figured out that, you know, paying a bribe, which is in essence of what this is, to somebody who may be the president of the United States and getting a tax deduction for it, no less.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win. You know, so you skim, you declare only a small piece of the actual donations. You then pad the charity with fake expenses. You have, I mean, why does Chelsea Clinton need a chief of staff? I ask you that. I mean,
I don't know.
Vice chairman does not get a chief of staff. Now, maybe in Washington, everybody gets a chief of staff, but in the real world, you know, the expense levels on this charity are ridiculous.
Now, not to go too far off on a tangent, but did you know that Stephen Paddock, the alleged Las Vegas shooter, is now associated with this Paradise Ranch charity?
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you know.
We're going to look into that further. But anyway, back onto this.
All right, so you put on fake expenses, and then you use the charity, the Clinton Global Initiative. I think there's, you know, and when we go through the State Department WikiLeaks files, the DNC files, the books about Hillary, and the Podesta leaks, and then the actual filings of the Clinton Global Initiative, and then it is crystal clear that that was used as a clearinghouse, a closed clearinghouse, where you charge a small amount of money. You decided who gets invited to it in the first place, right? You're only going to let people who are going to pay to play along.
Right.
You put them in these fancy meeting rooms, and then you let them run riot with government leaders who need to pad their own lifestyles later and are in the position to give you deals. So, you know, the Clinton Global Initiative has been a rampant fraud, but that's a big money fraud. When we add up, the Clintons made the mistake of listing out, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 different projects that now Donald Trump and his people can go project by project through. Something's happened?
Well, someone just put up a comment, and I just checked it. While we've been talking, Bitcoin has gone up to $6,250.
You're moving markets, man.
I mean, you know, I would say to all of our Bitcoin millionaires out there, now is the time to make the sponsorship payment to crowdsource the truth via Bitcoin.
There you go.
You know, make that, and before it goes down, it'll be like a zero
It'll
sum.
be a win-win.
It'll be a win-win. Absolutely.
So they're creating all these crooked transactions. They're hiding them. You're supposed to disclose when you operate a foundation any what are called related party transactions. So if a donor to a foundation makes a contribution and then also is engaged in a business deal arising out of the foundation, you've got to disclose that. Right? They, of course, didn't do that. Then you take it a step further. It's the Clintons. They have all their allies, you know, who've been in power in these various regulatory branches. And then you had, up until the election result, you had a lot of people assuming that Hillary was going to be, everyone assuming that she was going to be the president.
80 or 98% odds, right?
Yeah. So you compromise the regulatory process, and then what you do is you monetize your service. You go around the world saying, "Oh, I'm so noble." And she did that actually when the server came out. You remember that March day in 2015 when the Times story came out about the secret server. She held an impromptu press conference at the UN and began it saying, "Sorry I'm late. Bill and I do a lot of work with Bill and Melinda in the charitable field, and that's where we just were. Right. Now I may deign to answer a few of your questions." So, I mean, they've been monetizing this foundation in above-market speech payments, above-market book fees, inside deals like the Laureate deal and others, and none of those transactions have been fairly disclosed in any Clinton Foundation filing, whether it be federal, state, or otherwise, the way they absolutely need to be disclosed.
You know, when you were speaking earlier, Charles, about the bribes being hidden in purchases for things at ridiculously high prices, I was reminded of some information that came to me from Mr. Normal, who is a confidential crowdsourcer, who had some information about a cell phone store that was linked to this Egyptian group that for a while we were looking at as possibly a source of some of these hacked cell phones that were going on in the Iran scandal. And part of the way that he identified this was that there were these buildings, these office buildings that were worth like $4 million, but being bought for $16 million. So it's like, well, wait a minute, what the hell is going on there? Someone's getting $12 million for nothing, or for some illegal something.
Well, see, that's normally an area where the FBI is quite concerned. I mean, and you have a period of...
Well, unless they're complicit.
Well, you have a period of easy money, low interest rates. Banks are having a hard time making loans. If you've got a deal running where you've got straw purchasers,
right,
you know, going in and overpaying for buildings, borrowing money from banks, and then the money goes to the straw purchaser, and the guy who takes the loan out just disappears, doesn't pay the loan back. I mean, that's major league fraud. That strikes me, that's a real area where the FBI is focused, should be focused harder. Anyway, if we go to the next, I guess it's 6. And I did promise that I would focus on this using words as opposed to numbers. And I've laid this out. Generally, when I do slide presentations, I don't do them like this. But in this case, we wanted to have the slide presentation be one that somebody could consider without watching the video. You can read it for yourself and see what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Now,
and I will post it after the video is done.
Thank you, Jason. So in the case of a presidential library, even though Barack Obama's people now think perhaps that you don't have to actually put presidential records into a presidential archive? You do. And they're defined. Okay? They're absolutely defined. Now, you then, if you're going to grant to the National Archives a special use facility like the Clinton Foundation Presidential Complex in Little Rock, the grant has to come from a validly organized and operated foundation under the statute, which is shown there. It's a little detail, but you can read it. Lawyers can confirm what I'm saying. So the question becomes, on the date of the grant, which was the 18th of November 2004, was the Clinton Foundation a validly organized and operated foundation under Arkansas federal and international law? And the answer is no, it wasn't. And you can only figure that out if you have access to information that is purposefully withheld from the Clinton Foundation website. It seems to me that the Clinton Foundation may actually have defrauded the Archivist of the United States on November 18th, 2004. Okay?
The National Archives.
The head of it, yeah. The archivist is the person who has, under the statute, I don't know what we're doing here, but...
I'm just moving this so we can look at some of the...
Yeah, if we could just make this a little smaller so that I can talk about both columns. Yeah, there, that's perfect. Just like, okay, if you're going to grant a partial interest, it's crucial that the foundation actually be validly organized on the date of grant, i.e. on 18 November 2004. The timeline is crystal clear in state filings and in federal filings that between March 24th, 2004 and 18 November 2004, the Clinton Foundation created a subsidiary that it controlled over which it did not have valid legal authority to operate a quest to fight HIV AIDS internationally. It is crystal clear that they did that. It is crystal clear that they may have sought authority from the IRS for federal tax exemption for that entity. We don't yet know what requests they may have made, whether in Arkansas or other states, for such a state tax exemption. We know that they created companies, nonprofit companies in India, in South Africa.
This is the Health Access Initiative?
No, this is the HIV AIDS Initiative, right?
Okay, and that but they found an acronym that was exactly the same so that it could be even more confusing when they did that later, right?
Right. And then we also know that in this, there's a crucial agreement. I think you printed it out. I don't know where it may be.
Oh, it's over there on the printer.
All right. Well, we won't get it now, but it's, or unless Jason will get it just for theatrical effect. Now we're going to watch him do the high hurdles.
No, no one can see me do that.
All right, sorry. Be back in a second. I want to show you all this agreement, which is purposefully omitted, Mr. Trump, Mr. Gorka, Dr. Gorka. This agreement here is purposefully omitted. I'll show you the cover page right here. Okay, this agreement is purposefully omitted from the Clinton Foundation website. Associates were able to get it from the National Archives in a Freedom of Information Act request. Okay, it's a lengthy document. In next week's broadcast, we're going to go through in great depth the various provisions. But for now, I will tell you, I'll give this over to you, that it is replete with false and materially misleading statements about the status of the Clinton Foundation.
I'm shocked.
Well, but it's very serious because this is an agreement sent across state lines. The National Archives head office, I believe, from memory, is in Maryland.
College Park,
Maryland. And this was in Arkansas. The agreement was struck between an Arkansas entity and Maryland, so copies were sent across state lines. A physical donation of money was wired from Arkansas, probably, or New York, into the account for the National Archives. No part of that transaction was lawful.
Is this what Sandy Burglar left with his
No,
pants?
I don't know that he had anything to do with that. But so that's one major league thing. On the 18th of November 2004, the Clinton Foundation, led then by somebody who subsequently became the second dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, I believe, defrauded the National Archivist and the people of the United States in front of a large crowd involving a bunch of the living presidents, including George W. Bush. All right? And this is ground that President Donald Trump can go over. And we'll be going in great depth. It's not simply defrauding the National Archives. They defrauded the city of Little Rock. They defrauded the University of Arkansas, the University of Arkansas Foundation,
Well,
the state of Arkansas.
There's no one more adept at defrauding the people and establishments of Arkansas than the Clintons.
Yeah. So then just to go a little bit into the recent past, there was an article that excited my interest. It was published on the 13th of August, 2013. We don't need to push up the link. I just want to keep it on this page. Which was the culmination of some work that the Times was doing. Amy Chosick and Nick Confessor did this piece, which really irritated the Clintons because it asked some tough questions. It didn't go far enough, but it asked some tough, in my view, but it asked some tough questions. Evidently, these journalists at the New York Times did not see fit to read the link at the very bottom, which I commend to Mr. Trump and his team. This is this guide at the very bottom here, don't have to pull it up, is an excellent document that goes through state law in Arkansas, explains what you must do in Arkansas to run a charity properly, okay? And the only question in my mind is whether the Clinton Foundation trustees, through the life of this, have any protection whatsoever from having operated this operation with reckless disregard, gross negligence. And I say that because there were concerns over the controls. They were written and summarized in this article and some pieces that came out after this article.
That's the complete guide to starting a nonprofit organization.
Right. No. But in the Times article, there were some concerns expressed there about the status of the Clinton Foundation, and Bill penned an angry response and I think mischaracterized the Simpson-Thatcher report that was actually completed, I believe, in 2012, maybe around January, February timeframe. But then on the 2nd of November 2013, which we found out recently, we didn't find this out while Hillary, I think, was still running, or maybe just as she was losing, we found out that on the 2nd of November 2013, the Clinton Foundation illegally reorganized itself via its bylaws to put Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton in ironclad control over a public charity. You cannot do that. Right? Well, you cannot take something that's supposed to be independent and say, this independent entity that stands in the shoes of government and gives its donors a higher tax benefit than you would get if you gave to a private foundation. You can't have such an entity controlled by one family. And yet they did that on the 2nd of November 2013. I surmise, and I'm sure a real FBI, a real investigator could look at the correspondence between the Clinton Foundation and the various trustees who elected on or after the 2nd of November to come in and serve as window dressing. We can find out what they were told, right? Most likely they were told, listen, I'm in a bind here, we've got an election coming up, Hillary's going to be the next president.
Do me a solid.
Do me a solid.
Yeah.
And so you get these people to come on board and they're thinking, I had no liability, the Clintons are taking the liability, so I can't lose here. I've got the next president of the United States. I know that I helped them out. They're going to help me out. One hand washes the other. There's got to be correspondence in that file. Okay? So this is on the 2nd of November 2013. All right? Hillary, it turns out, we find this out on June 27th, 2017, only is removed as a Class A director on the 10th of September 2015. Now, she, I believe, announced her candidacy in April of 2015, which means that for 5 months in 2015, while she was running against all comers, but Bernie, she hid the fact for 5 months that she was simultaneously a candidate to be president while also illegally controlling a public charity.
I can't imagine why she'd hide that.
Well, because anybody, on the question of competence, right? I mean, this is somebody who was sold to all of us as a legal, brilliant person, and the people who are expert in this area, the lawyers, it's very black and white in the area of charity, and it's like, how could anybody besmirch a charity? And you read all these memos that people put together, the books they put together on the subject. This is such a gross error that it would call into question the basic competence and fitness of Hillary Clinton to hold any position of trust. I mean, she abused her position of trust as a trustee of her own foundation while fundraising. Mind you, they were raising money for an endowment in this time frame.
She's kind of a distrustee.
Yeah, well, so she was on just when they were milking this thing. And another thing I would add here. On the 2nd of November 2013, I believe, I forget when the secret server information came out. I think that was February 2015, right?
I don't recall.
I think the Clintons held on to presidential records, property of the United States of America, including valuable information concerning who flew on these various delegations into the country, who flew with the secretary around the world to meet with all these missing emails were in the possession of the Clinton people, as Hillary was putting together a campaign that needed what? It needed money. And it was approaching people who had a lot to gain if Hillary became president, and also potentially a lot to lose. So, I mean, only when we see little bits and pieces like this do we grow to appreciate the full consequence. I know this is taking time, Mr. President, but this is important. So now let's go to slide 7. No, the whole slide. Okay.
There you have it.
Great. All right, so here we have the record of the Clinton Foundation goes all the way back to 1997. It involves actions taken in many, many states, many, many countries. But I mentioned that I put the Clinton Foundation on notice that they needed to amend their tax returns, right? And what they did on November 16th, 2015, is they amended their tax return for 2010, 11, 12, and 13 for the parent company, and they filed one for the parent company for 2014. The significance of this, I'm told by lawyers, is that this means that the statute of limitations runs on the 2010 information from November 16th, 2015 forward for, I think, 5 years. So there's still room on this. You know, I'm sure lawyers, clever lawyers, would find additional ways around this. But what one needs to do is to look at the Clinton Foundation statements made at the time they did it. And we put on the right-hand side links to the letter from the president of the Clinton Foundation, was Donna Shalala. It's a letter where she lies through her teeth.
Such a funny name.
And attached to that letter was a fact sheet, which is a pack of lies as well. And you need to, once you consider this entire presentation, with the resources that you have, Mr. President, go and look at this letter that went out that was purposefully misleading. November 16th, 2015, in the middle of a presidential campaign, as Hillary Clinton was spoiling for a fight with Bernie Sanders.
Dear
and I
friends.
think the Bernie Sanders people and this Tom Perez and the people who are still in the Democratic Party, they need to consider this, because this was gross and materially misleading. Had the Democratic voter known the true state of the Clinton Foundation on November 16th, 2015, Bernie Sanders would have won the nomination. And my suspicion is he might have beaten Donald Trump in the climate of the moment.
They're talking all about the 2014 990 filing and exhaustive review that found several errors.
See, this is the Clinton practice of telling part of the truth.
The
not the whole
limited
truth.
hangout.
Limited hangout, exactly. All they did is they went back to 2010, because you can't go back before 2010. When you go back before 2010, you get into the record of bribes and corruption, which they must have known about, involving Uranium One, right?
This is exploding in their face in
Right.
real time. Now, Charles, do you think that the Clinton Foundation and all of these people are aware of you and your research and your investigation? They must be, right?
Well, we don't meet for coffee, but they definitely, I think they follow me on Twitter, so I would guess from time to time I tweet.
I think they follow you down Fifth Avenue.
We don't need to discuss that. So now, the second block here, I mentioned that the Clinton Foundation filings, in my judgment, are false and materially misleading because they omit crucial disclosures. So you can't, unlike a normal tax return that an individual might file, you don't have to fill it out yourself as an individual and then hire an accounting firm to double check it. But you do have to do that for a charity. And accounting firms, it's not like there's the Ortel method of accounting. There is U.S. generally accepted standards of accounting that are quite specific. They'd fill up your room with paper, right? And so you can look up these ordinary people can look and say, what are the rules that pertain to a foundation? Well, you have to explain your programs. You have to explain, that's your biggest expense. You got to go through this. I was set up to be a presidential library. This is what I spent on being a presidential library, right? You have to explain it. Accountants have to check it. And the Clinton Foundation has never done that properly. Indeed, the returns themselves through about 2007 don't even give meaningful breakdowns in the tax returns. And the audits are not ever prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So just on that alone.
So every charity needs to kind of audit itself? Is that what you're saying?
Above a very small size. So it depends on the state, and it depends on the time period. In New York, from memory, it's like if your revenues are $1 million or so, you have to get a full-scale audit. You can get what's called a review, which is where they don't really check that carefully, if it's smaller than that. But a full-scale audit means that you check that the return for 2016, you present your financial information on a basis that is consistent, that is the same approach as with the preceding year. So in 2010, if you have reorganized yourself, as they did do in 2010, you have to present information for 2009 on a comparable basis. And of course, they don't do that.
Right.
Okay. In 2010, which is where they start this, you have to comment on the opening position of your firm. So the opening position would be December 31st, 2009. What did my balance sheet look like?
What happened?
What happened? And in all of these subsidiary returns, Clinton Health Access, Clinton Global, et cetera, they failed to do that. They don't even comment on it. So you just look, you don't need to be steeped in accounting to look at this record and say it's a complete fraud.
Well, let me ask you something else, because we're seeing, we talk about pattern and practice, and I mean, these seem to be pretty tried and true methods. The Clinton Health Access Initiative, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, they're so similar, but they're different.
Well, that's a good one. So we see in this, if we could just make this a little smaller, this one.
Why are they doing that, Charles?
Well, I'll tell you why in that specific case. So, not that small, just a little bit bigger. There we go. Yeah. So, in 2009, a year they didn't want to go over, they created two companies. They created two not-for-profit companies. They created the Clinton Health Access Initiative, which has the same acronym, one would argue, as the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, right? Both CHAI, C-H-A-I. Right. And I believe the reason they did that, and we'll get to the bottom of this, because governments are now looking at this, that the biggest donor to the Clinton Foundation, starting in 2006-07 timeframe, was an entity in Switzerland, principally funded by the government of France and other governments, and one foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation. Unitaid. So by 2009, Unitaid had given or advanced more than $300 million to the old HIV/AIDS business.
Right.
Which we'll go into in another slide shortly. We'll explain how grievously defective that entity was. And they were in a horrible place. They'd made a multi-year contribution. They'd made multiple public announcements in like 40 countries around the world that they were doing this. They had made multiple reports. They'd raised lots of money, that is Unitaid. They couldn't say whoops, or I guess they felt they couldn't say whoops, we screwed up. And the guy who was running it was a medical doctor and the former foreign minister of France. So you couldn't say, well, like I'm just a professor. I mean, I couldn't.
The guy should have known.
He should have known on many levels. He even wrote a book about it. He wrote a book and that was published in, we had it one day here.
Qu'est-ce que fait?
No, what happened in French? No. It's The Power of Numbers is the name of the book.
Oh yeah, right.
Story of Unitaid.
You've shown me that book.
So in 2009, here's the problem. They created this Clinton Health Access Initiative on September 29th, 2009, and it may or may not have operated in 2009. And there also at the same time was operating the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. And they didn't explain any of that in the 2009 filings, which came together in 2010 around November.
Who was reviewing any of these?
Well, the
filings?
answer is, somebody gave the word as a guess, and that's what Bob Mueller and a real team could find out here. The 2009 TED, remind you, is precisely when Uranium One is going on. It's precisely when the Crooked Laureate deal, bills being paid for that. There's all sorts of things. Ranbaxy is being investigated here. Lots of stuff is going on in this time frame, and a real accounting firm charged with doing its duties properly, and real trustees, and a real system of regulation caring about this charity at a time when Hillary Clinton was our Secretary of State, would have seen this. So there must be something in the files here. And my understanding is that Barack Obama liked to use his BlackBerry, and Hillary's always pictured with a BlackBerry. Where are all these emails? This hunt for the missing emails.
Well, they seem to be possibly on a server that was at 4809 Sprayer Street.
It could well have been. Exactly. It could well have been. But I mean, when we start getting into this, we start understanding the context of why people what was the motive that the Clintons had for hiding this, and what is the motive that Valerie Jarrett and the team Obama may have had for possibly emulating the Clintons and having another secret server to house whatever personal communications under alias emails may have involved the Obama team.
Well, the motivation for the secret server is obvious. They don't want you or me to look at it.
Right, well, and as somebody close to me said, the E in email stands for evidence. And so somebody has these emails, all right?
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing here is we learned in the last week, we should have talked about this earlier, that the IRS was forced to enter into a settlement, which is, I believe, subject to review by a federal judge on Make Some News, the Lois Lerner settlement, the Tea Party settlement. We have the link to on the right-hand side. You don't need to open it up. But last week, a settlement was reached in which it appears the settlement specifically fingers Lois Lerner by name.
Oh, poor choice of words.
Oh, sorry about that. And targets, I should say.
Yeah.
And that settlement, I would argue, the federal judge should not allow to go forward because I don't think it's tough enough yet on the IRS, but it's a good sign. What we have here, in my view, just from this record alone, or the known record without any more evidence, we have a double standard in the administration of justice. We have, under the Obama years in particular, and one might also argue, people connected to the Bush team and the Clinton team, we have a system where the politically elite families and their cronies escape the full hammer of justice in the way that people like Corinne Brown, this congressperson in Florida, may suffer the full wrath of our Justice Department because her last name is Brown.
Or something?
It's Brown. It's not Clinton, Bush, or Obama. It's Brown. And that is just wrong. And that's something that Donald Trump, will win a lot of, but he'll do the right thing, I hope. But people across the spectrum will say, you know what? We cannot have a double standard. Justice is blind. It's not foolish and ignorant. So we go to the next one. I guess we got 10 more to go here, and I don't know how much.
Wow. We might need to break this into multiple days. You're looking for 8?
Yeah.
We've been broadcasting for an hour and 50, just to let you know.
All right. Well, do you want to take a quick break and come back to it?
No, I'm fine.
All right. I think we've already done this slide. We want the next one. Here we want this one. Done that slide. Now that one. Yeah. Okay. This is a very important slide. Now, the Clinton Foundation uses its website as the primary portal to reveal all of its financial filings. The version of the 2007 financial filing that is on the Clinton Foundation website purposefully omits pivotally important information concerning the breakdown of results by the various initiatives, the CHI that you talked about. The pages that deal with that are missing in the version. Somebody made a decision to say, on the version everyone's going to look at, we're going to take those pages out. We show you on this slide, the second block on the left, how to get the real version. It's in New York State. And Attorney General Schneiderman, you should be listening to this. Okay?
Where does it show how to get the real version?
You go to that link and you punch, up will pop a landing page, and it'll say, you insert the federal employer identification number for the main foundation, which is 311580204, into the field. Up will pop the Clinton Foundation, and then you hit the link that's shown there, and then you go to the line 2007 annual report, and what you'll find in the right-hand side, these are just some of the defects. The first defect is that it claims that it's an audit. It's dated December 12th, 2008, okay? 27 days past the final day in which you could file an audit. You're not allowed to issue an audit that late. It's a violation of New York law, okay? It does not present consolidated results. Consolidated results are where you take all of the entities around the world over which you have influence and control, their standards, and you must lump them into a pile And if there's interconnecting transactions, you've got to eliminate them properly and validly using strict accounting rules. And you present a consolidated picture. They don't do that. We don't know all the different entities that may have been operating on that date. Instead, they present combined. That's flatly non-compliant.
Okay, so I've got the EIN number in there, and I'm hitting search.
Right, and up will come a name. It could be slow. Sometimes on the
Yeah, it's very slow.
Sometimes on the weekends they do maintenance and stuff like that. But up will eventually pop the Clinton Foundation name, and then you have to hit on that name. There's a hot link. Then it takes you to a table of contents page, and then you look at the 2007 thing, and we're now, there you go. So you hit that hot link you see below the orange box.
Mm-hmm. Oh, below it?
Yeah. The black line.
Yep.
Up should come table of contents.
That's the Bill Hillary.
Yeah, and
Chelsea Clinton.
There should be a list when the next, yeah. Then further down the page, there's a long list of things, and there's 2007 annual report. Further down. Yeah, in there somewhere. You'll have to move the page to the right.
I've got it.
Yeah, and you hit on that link, and then you'll download the full report. And at the back of that full report, I think, first you get was that the...
Can you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the New York State form.
But people can dig into
You
all
can really
this.
dig in, and you'll see at the end there's an accounting statement from BKD. That's the accounting firm. And it's not an audit. It's late. All right. It shows, when you get into it, the very last 2 pages of this filing is a table that's omitted, or 2 tables that are omitted from the Clinton Foundation filing. And they show that Chai is a substantial majority of the whole thing. We're going to get into this next week, and I'll do all the math for you and show you. But it's well over a majority of the revenues. It's almost 100% of the grants, from governments and foundations go to Chai. Okay?
Why is that?
Well, because Chai was sexy. It's fighting HIV/AIDS internationally. That's a cause. The president's doing something great. Let's give him money. It's a tough thing to do. He's the president. He'll get it done.
It's like helping underdeveloped countries and fighting AIDS. It's like, who could argue with that? That's a good thing.
Well, I could argue with that.
But I'm saying that's why they do it. They try to position it
Right.
as this incredibly magnanimous thing, but that's where they hide their fraud.
Right. And so in the question, the reason I think fighting diseases in countries that don't have hospitals and doctors and nurses and electricity and roads and infrastructure is certainly a noble thing to do. But
Except
it's a
if you're
dangerous,
cheating them and stealing the money.
It's a dangerous thing to do as well, because you don't have the infrastructure you need. It's not like you give somebody a pill, some skinny person a pill who doesn't have clean water or a place to live, and that's going to help
better,
them.
right?
Yes, the pill may or may not help, but there's other problems, and if you look at the math, it could be that the cost of the pill, which the Clintons claim they reduced that cost, we could debate that, is only, let's say, 20% of the cost or less. The other 80% of the picture isn't there. And just because you give somebody a pill doesn't necessarily mean you're helping them. You could actually be harming them if the pill was, say, adulterated. So Chai is very important, okay? Both the versions of the audit and the IRS forms fail to provide a meaningful breakdown of the program expenditures. And the accounting literature is crystal clear that you've got to explain. That's the most important thing in an IRS form. What did you spend the money on in pursuit? How did you spend the money in pursuit of your tax-exempt purposes? That's the fundamental question that needs to be answered. They purposely failed to answer that. They also failed to disclose, through 2007, the identities of any government grants. And grants to the Clinton Foundation. They don't disclose it. You're required to disclose it in the IRS form, the amount, aggregate amount, and in New York State and California, there are additional burdens where you have to provide the details. They don't do that. This is a little bit technical, and we won't get too much into it today, but you have to, when you fill out these audits, right? The year ends on December 31st, 2007. The audit doesn't get completed, in this case, until the 12th of December, 2008. Right. An accounting firm is required to comment on material events that may have occurred between the end of the year, December 31st, 2007, and the date of the report.
Such as, we stole all the money.
Or Ira Magaziner admitted, or the people who were running Chai admitted that they diverted $23 million from Chai.
Why would they admit that?
Well, if you don't admit it, it's even worse. Or alternatively, Chai, the authorities in Massachusetts decided to involuntarily revoke authority for Chai to operate on March 31st, 2008. You might want to admit that. So there's no commentary on that. That's a material omission. And there's no commentary on the tax uncertainties. The question, is this a real charity? The events that I describe, any one of them would call into question the ability for this thing to survive. And at the very least, you have to make a comment as the accounting firm if you're doing your real work. We have substantial concerns. While we are told that every effort was made to comply with applicable laws,
we found this or that problem.
Yeah. And the final point is that when you do one of these accounting projects, yes, it only deals with 2007. So it starts December 31st, 2006, and it ends December 31st, 2007. But that work rests on all prior disclosures. And if prior disclosures are false and you don't correct them, then there's no prayer of having it be proper. And all previous disclosures and all subsequent disclosures to date for the Clinton Foundation have been false and materially misleading. They're incorrect, they're not complete, they omit material defects, they're not prepared consistently, and on and on. So if we go to 9, all right, this is something that is, if I were a Democrat, if I were Barack Obama, I would be extremely upset.
Because you're Barack Obama, or because of what you're about to reveal?
What we're now going to reveal.
Got it.
So, the effective date of the document that was supposed to regulate the conflict between the Clinton Foundation and Hillary while she was Secretary of State is the same date as that audit, December 12th, 2008. The audit for 2007 is dated the same effective date as the MOU, right?
Right.
So they were simultaneously completing the audit and getting Valerie Jarrett to sign a document, or at least agree to a document, the Obama team to agree to a document that would regulate the idea that Hillary could be Secretary of State while at the same time Bill and her only daughter were going to run some foundation that also would be doing all sorts of stuff around the world, right? One version of that document, we've been through this before, so we don't have to pull it up now, but one version of that memorandum of understanding was sent by Kerry and Lugar to his Senate colleagues and to the public, all right? And this document, I think, is an adulterated version of the real MOU.
What makes you say that?
This document on the signature page shows Valerie Jarrett signing it on the 16th of December, 2008. Now, the second version that's in blue there.
Now wait, is this the thing that's dated December 18th?
That's the cover letter. That thing transmits, if you keep going, a short document.
Signed by John Kerry.
That's the cover letter. Okay, he transmits something on that date. And the question is, did he transmit this version of the MOU? Now you look at that when you scroll to the final page.
December 12th, right.
It's going to be a little slow, but I'll tell you that the signature for Valerie Jarrett the date looks doctored to me. It looks as if they overwrote a 2.
Oh, right. I remember talking about this before.
They overwrote a 2 over the 11.
Right.
Right?
So
and we see that the different version was obtained by Judicial Watch in a Freedom of Information Act request, I think, or in a request. They were told, here's the true version. Okay? The second one here. This is the real version, obtained on the 3rd of December, 2013. And we go through the same exercise and look at the signature. It's very clearly signed on the 16th of November by Valerie Jarrett.
Wait a minute. It's not letting me get there.
It's just got probably overloaded or something.
This is the document, right?
Yeah, it'll be at the very end of it.
It's not going there.
Well, people will be able to see for themselves. There you go.
It's loading.
It just, yeah, there you see it.
Okay.
You got it?
Yeah.
See
That's
that?
interesting.
All right. So, the Senate should be asking,
What
you know,
happened?
Which version did you get? Judicial Watch should be asking, if the Senate got one version, why did they get a different version? And more importantly,
Wow, Charles, that's pretty compelling.
and more importantly, how could Valerie Jarrett have known enough about the Clinton Foundation by the 16th of November? I mean, we think back to what happened when Donald Trump won. The election, I think, was around, from memory, the 4th in 2008, 4th of November 2008.
I don't recall.
How in 12 days could you absorb enough about the Clinton Foundation when at the same time you're putting together a government, right? You're I think, co-head of the transition team in Valerie Jarrett. How did you sign this and accept the representations made by the Clintons concerning the status of the Clinton Foundation on the 16th of November 2008? Now, on the 18th of December 2008, if we could just make this a little smaller, please.
Sorry, I don't know why it's so difficult to scroll around that document, but I need to examine that a little bit more closely to determine if, in fact, those are identical, but it sure looks like it.
Yeah. The only thing that's different, I think, is the signature page. So here, there's a list on the 18th of December 2008, a list supposedly of all cumulative contributions for the period 1997 forward is released by the Clinton Foundation. Now, what's significant about that? First, there is no tax return submitted by the Clinton Foundation for the short period October 23rd, 1997 through December 31st, 1997. There should have been one if there were donations. Well, there should have been one in any period showing no donations, but this summary list appears to suggest that donations were made in 1997. How come they weren't recorded in 1997? And who made the donations in 1997? I have an idea of one, I think, was from the second inaugural expense trust, a second inaugural benefit, whatever, that should have filed a report by April of 2000, April of 99, let me get this right, April 9th of 1997, likely had excess amounts left over. And between 1 and 5 million, I think it was, the number they claimed that went in was 2 million and either 350,000 or 2,050,000, I forget which, 350,000 I think, went in supposedly in 98. Well, why did they wait until 98 to put that money in when, in theory, that thing was supposed to have been disbanded in April of 1997? So what happened there? But anyway, this list also is noteworthy because it shows a whole bunch of governments gave money, right? Yet, cumulatively gave money, yet none of the returns for the period from 98 through 2007 show any government donations in the required detail, okay? So turning then to the defects in this whole approach, we've talked about this a little bit before. This is not a binding legal agreement. It is a memorandum of understanding, right? Lawyers, there are a lot of smart lawyers around this process. Why did they say, all right, I got what we'll do here? To reassure the world and the American public, instead of doing a real agreement, let's do a loosey-goosey MOU.
Yeah.
All right, and let's make false and materially misleading statements about the Clinton Foundation throughout the body of this document. We'll get into that next week.
Do we know what lawyers were involved in doing
We do.
that?
Cheryl Mills was involved, supposedly. Doug Band was involved, supposedly. And, and who represented Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett, right? Because obviously they were at a disclosure disadvantage. The Clintons, in theory, knew all this. Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett and her team and John Podesta had just spent a long period of time, trying to figure out what was going on in life to put a government together. They didn't have the time to test and see whether, Ira Magaziner had diverted money from Chai by July of 2008. They didn't have the ability to study that. In addition, this document doesn't bind Bill Clinton, right? It says this is an agreement between the parties. Bill is not a party to this agreement. How do you do a deal to try to protect conflicts of interest without having Bill Clinton be a party? It's ridiculous. It doesn't admit to the numerous disciplinary actions that were taken by states, Mississippi and others, against the Clinton Foundation, Utah, and Pennsylvania against the fundraiser. It doesn't admit any of that, right? And it should have admitted that. And the claims concerning the cumulative contributions don't reconcile with known information about the identified donors. So on the face of it, this is just a disaster. You're defrauding your fellow senators to get your confirmation. You're defrauding the American public. You're defrauding your donors. And why would
They don't discriminate.
Yeah. So if we go to the next page. All right. While all this is going on, we have insider trading scandals.
Oh.
Right? We have Gallian and Gupta. There's this now jailed billionaire who is found guilty by May of 2011. Right? We have Rajat Gupta, the head of McKinsey. He's found guilty in May of 2013 of insider trading. In August of 2008, there is a
I think so. Just a second.
Can people listen to this or?
Yeah, people will be able to hear you, but the quality is going to be not what we want it to be.
We'll have this up in just a second. We didn't expect it to go quite this long, but it's important. It's okay. We good?
Yeah. Things wrong. Hello? Minor technical difficulties. We're back.
Okay. In August of 2008, there's a private litigation settlement. It's a lengthy document. On pages 22 and 23, you'll see details described of how monies were routed to Bill Clinton and possibly for expenses to Hillary and Chelsea, but not disclosed. These amounts are not disclosed in Clinton Foundation filings. In addition, by March of 2010, the SEC took actions against the CEO of this public company, Vinod Gupta, no relation to Rajat, who it turns out was also a donor to the Clinton Foundation. So none of this is all disclosed properly. And the big question here is, while there was all this focus in the United States under the Obama administration and the Bush administration concerning possible insider trading and abuses, was there enough focus internationally? If all you're going to do is tag people for their crimes inside the US, but you ignore the possibility that they may set up secret accounts, let's say in Mauritius or Panama or elsewhere, and trade on the valuable information that they had acquired either through the Clinton connections, through the McKinsey connections, or otherwise, you may tag Raj Rajaratnam and Rajat Gupta for small beer crimes, when in reality there's these massive crimes going on around the world. And why would you do that? Why wouldn't you go as far as possible to make sure that people who trade on insider information, people who abuse positions of trust, people who may have taken company secrets, in the case of McKinsey, and monetize them, why wouldn't you investigate that very carefully? And if you're Donald Trump and you're looking now in 2017 to think clearly about the issue of, do we let foreign call centers and foreign operations house valuable information in suspect countries where the controls obviously aren't strong enough, like India and China elsewhere, and these smaller countries, in Ireland, Do we want to let people do that? Or is it time, knowing what we know, I mean, the number of companies that have had to admit that they lost control over their account information inside the US is pretty high. Should we have a higher standard now and say to people, you want to operate people, you want to keep their valuable information, it's on you to make sure that you're not hacked. It's on you to make sure that you protect it. And you're running a pretty big risk if you do this in a place like India until they come up to snuff. So this is a much bigger set of issues here, both as pertains to the Clinton Foundation and these insider trading scandals. But there's also a policy set of issues that really needs some investigation. So if we go to the next slide, and we'll try to pick the pace up. All right, we've talked in the past about Ranbaxy, but here I provide some links to the actual settlement agreement, to the Dirty Medicine story, which people have seen before, and the Blackburn report, okay? One needs to go back into this in some depth. The association between the Clinton Foundation and Ranbaxy began by October 2003. Certainly in October of 2003, as the Clinton Foundation, as Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner were going around fundraising for the HIV/AIDS operation when it wasn't legally organized anywhere, and when it wasn't certainly authorized by the IRS, how could they have been simultaneously entering into agreements with a Ranbaxy without disclosing these links anywhere? How do you do that? And perish the thought, did people close to, say, Rajaratnam or Rajat Gupta, or the people themselves, or the Clintons, did they invest in these drug companies, knowing that their prices were low, and that once it became known that the Global Fund would be up and running, that the Clinton Foundation would be buying all sorts of these generic drugs, that the prices of these Indian...
It's insider trading, obviously.
Right, which wasn't prosecuted as aggressively, and still isn't prosecuted aggressively enough in India, right? Or in offshore havens where people might have bought shares in these
Panama?
Like Panama, like Cayman, et cetera. So, this is something, you want some real investigating to do? We should be investigating the generic drug manufacturers, and as well, the engine for a drug is called active pharmaceutical ingredient, API. So there are companies that supplied API into Ranbaxy. It's not just Ranbaxy, who probably has additional legal liability here. It could be these API manufacturers as well. So you want something real to do, a serious investigation that would be impactful? This is one. Then we go to the 12th slide. All right. This is a reorganization that occurred a set of reorganizations that occurred while Bob Mueller was head of the FBI. Mm-hmm. All this happened while he was head of the FBI. The Clinton Foundation made a decision to go and create 5 separate new entities, okay?
Oh, and we've got the EINs
so
here.
You can look this all up, right? And you can see, it's not like they did it once. 5 separate times, the Clinton Foundation trustees allowed their name to be used in connection with false and materially misleading applications to the IRS at a time when Lois Lerner was in charge of the tax-exempt department to create these new charities. In each case, they did not adequately disclose their prior transgressions. When you go before the IRS to create a charity, and it's clear from your record that you've broken the law before, you're asked questions like, who's going to be involved in this? Are there any defects in their records? And if you purposefully omit that, generally speaking, the IRS gets kind of cheesed off about it, and they go back after you. And what they can do is they can retroactively revoke your authority to operate. So 5 separate times this happened with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, Global Initiative, the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, this Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. All 5 times, false and materially misleading applications were approved.
So Charles, why did Sessions come out and say that he's not going to take any action against Lois Lerner?
Well, I can't explain Mr. Sessions. I think that the incorrect decision was made. I think that when you pull on this, the way I hope people will now pull on it, you expose so many people, so many donors, so many powerful institutions, Republican, Democrat alike, that the winning argument for people who live in Washington, D.C. was, well, yeah, we can't go down because if we do that, everybody loses. Well, no. The people who don't lose are the people in America,
Yeah.
who
aren't criminals.
who aren't criminals, which is the overwhelming majority of this country. So no, we need to go into this. We need to expose what really happened here.
You know what's funny, Charles? In that King James video that you pointed out, I think I might have clipped this out because we're going to be talking about it in a future video. He talks about the influence of the Hells Angels in Canada. And I didn't want to include that because we're going to do a whole report on the Hells Angels. But he says there's something like 630 members of the Hells Angels in Canada, but yet they've got this terror grip over the entire nation of, 30 million or however many people live in Canada. And it's the same kind of thing with Congress and the IRS and it's a small number of criminals, but they've got this tight grip over everybody and they control the right.
Let's hope that's not the case going forward.
Seems
So
to be.
we rip along to the next one, which is, I guess, the 13th. Getting
Unlucky
closer,
for
guys.
some.
Okay. So after the 2010 election, we go back into history here. Barack Obama wins, all kinds of trouble getting the economy back going again.
2008 election.
He wins in 2008, he takes over in 2009, tries to get his stuff across the line, and there are problems. I mean, the economy doesn't immediately roar back to life. Jobs continue to be lost, international setbacks here and there. There are all sorts of issues. After he wins the 2010, a lot of this stuff, if the 2010 electorate had known, for example, the true extent of what the confidential informant's now going to tell us, supposedly.
If he lives.
He'll live. Concerning the Uranium One. And if people had really known about these illegal reorganizations of the Clinton Foundation, the true status of the Clinton Foundation, query, would the election losses have been worse in 2010 when the Tea Party roared to life than they actually would? I submit they would have been a lot worse, right? So after the 2010 election, the important context here is the efforts to ramp up against Tea Party applicants began during 2010 and amplified in 11 as people thought through, that Barack has got to win re-election in 2012, otherwise our goose is cooked. This is precisely when the Clintons in 2011, beginning in July of 2011, the Clintons ramp up an illegal, I would argue, drive to raise a capital endowment that I don't think adequately discloses the many defects in the past efforts to raise a capital endowment, going back to the very beginning, right? The disclosures concerning amounts that may have been raised for endowment purposes show there was no endowment. Yet, lots of people think they gave money for an endowment. I've been through a bunch of these different forms, including governments and big foundations and individuals, gave money for an endowment. But in this period preceding July 2011, there's like $200,000 in endowment all in, and they'd raised tens of millions of dollars or more.
How could they hope to get away with that?
Well, Barack wins, then Hillary wins.
They're just covering it up.
Just they thought they'd cover up. The second thing is that the test for a charity normally is a charity cannot be operated, it's not for profit. So it can't be operated for the purpose of creating more than a, quote, insubstantial amount of collective private gain. That means all gains around the charity, not simply Bill Clinton's money, anybody, like the creation of Teneo, their speaking fees, their book deals, their investment deals, Lloyd. You would look at all the private gain created by all the Clinton Global Initiative stuff, all the benefits to run boxes.
But isn't the book deal coming from the fact that he was president, not that he runs a charity?
Not the book that he wrote about charity and got $6.4 million for, supposedly. I mean, and the test normally was the amount of private gain created by all parties more than insubstantial, and court decisions...
$6.4 million is...
Well, court decisions have held that amounts in the mid-hundreds.
Of thousands.
No, dollars.
Oh.
$100. $400. More than that is more than insubstantial.
Wow, so $6.4 million definitely counts.
Yeah. So there are real people looking at this, real investigators must have looked at this and said, is there a record that any real people, remember there was an investigation from 2001 to 4. What did the forensic accountants say in 2001 to 2004? Or were they instructed not to look at this? And if so, who instructed them not to look at it, right? And are these papers still around? I'm sure we're going to hear, well, as part of a normal housekeeping exercise, we destroyed all of these papers. Anyway, but if there are records, Why wasn't this looked through? And then on the question of partisan political activities, the IRS is very, very clear that a charity, public charity, cannot be used to advance the political interests of one person or a group of people in a political campaign. You can't do that. Yet, to me, this Clinton Foundation, if you reduce it to its core, it's a way for a politically ambitious family seeking to install a dynasty, right? Covers off the very expensive costs of their many hangers-on. The Maggie Williams, the Cheryl Mills, the Bruce Lindsays, all these people, Stephanie Street and others, Doug Bann. You could pay them money or cover their expenses through this charity and position Hillary Clinton at first to be a candidate in 2007 and 2008 and then again. And maybe if they got away with this, if Hillary had won, Chelsea and later. You can't do that in a charity. But they did do it. So there's a record of it. So let's study it. Now, if you go to the very bottom of this page, in addition to the above, there's a firm called FD that was purchased by a firm called FTI, and there's this thing called Teneo that operates and is supposedly, go to the preceding page, preceding page.
Oh, Teneo, right there.
Yeah, at the bottom. Intense focus needs to go on the evolution of this. For FD was purchased by FTI, and then I think a firm was created called DK, Declan Kelly, that was run by Doug Bann. He admits to that in the infamous Bann memo of December 2011.
Stupidest memo ever.
Pretty bad. Kumiki Gibson's memo was pretty bad too. But intense focus needs to go on that. What were these firms basically used as vehicles to route payments towards the Clintons in exchange for favors that benefit clients of these firms? That needs to be studied intensely. Now, the 14 one. And in addition, we've talked about this in the past, the Barack Obama Foundation seems to have been positioned it was formed in 31 January 2014, and of course, who did they use? Perkins Coie, same law firm. That's natural because I think Bob Bauer, or Robert Bauer, whatever he likes to go by, I think married to Anita Dunn, is a longtime associate of the Obamas, so it's no surprise he would use a trusted lawyer. But serious people grounded in charity law need to go into the history of this and ask themselves, is this entity, the Barack Obama Foundation, already something that needs to be shut down?
Yeah.
Was it organized lawfully? Has it been operated lawfully, both in its activities, but more importantly, in its fundraising activities? Has it disclosed to the donors who have given it money the true state of its legal organization? Have they been raising endowment funds? Have they been raising other types of funds? What representations did they make? Did they use the mails? Did they use telephones? Did they use digital media? What do their reports say? And oh, by the way, if it already hasn't filed, needs to file its tax forms for 2016 by November 15th, I believe, 2017. So even if it has filed forms, those may not be accurate, but if it hasn't, they need to really make sure the ones they file now are accurate. So if we go to the next page, and we're almost done, ladies and gentlemen, almost done.
This is a Charles Ortel marathon.
All right, so I think, if there are any serious investigative journalists, say at a place like the New York Times, which maybe there are, maybe there aren't. Certainly there are at Fox. Janine Pirro, for example, has been all over this. Greg Jarrett has been all over this. There are others at Fox and elsewhere. One American News Network. James O'Keefe is a serious journalist. To me, one big question I would have is, were the Obamas duped by the Clintons or complicit? And to get to the bottom of this, we'll be going through this next week. When does the timeline start, actually? The fable, I would argue, that was sold to the public was that after Hillary abandoned all hope in June of 2008, yes, they helped out, but she was busy with other things. She didn't know what she was going to do later. And they were walking in the woods. Lots of stuff happens in the woods. And Bill's cell phone rang. Because that's, Barack Obama didn't have Hillary's cell phone. He had Bill's cell phone number. And there's a long story, and I think...
Why would he not have her cell phone?
I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, the story was that the discussions began to happen on Secretary of State in November of 2008 after the election. Maybe, maybe not. I think it's more likely that well before June of 2008, I mean, the late January, early February period wasn't as bad as the face plan on September 11th, 2008, but it was pretty bad. I mean,
face plan on September 11th, 2016.
Rather, yeah. It was pretty bad, though. This initial
her shoes fell off, and they threw her in the van.
No, that was bad. But I'm referring to her initial campaign forays in the primaries in 2008.
Oh.
In January, late January 2008, she didn't do so well.
Oh, right.
And so they had to know that the campaign, and were spending a lot of money. The Clinton Foundation was in desperate shape. Kumiki Gibson was this outside person was hired to look at the status of the Clinton Foundation, certainly by July 2008. So the question becomes, in my mind, when did a negotiation start, if one did start, between the Clintons and the Obamas as to what might happen should Barack Obama win after the election day, what Hillary's role might be? If we discover that in truth, if the records show that the real conversations didn't start happening until mid to late November, then maybe they were duped. Okay? If they happened a lot earlier, maybe they were complicit. And why do I bring all this up? Because this is yet another reason that emails are missing. Don't tell me that Barack Obama, a person who was addicted to his BlackBerry, doesn't have a mountain of emails that are out there.
I thought he could only contact 4 people with that BlackBerry.
That's after he won. I'm talking about when he still had his BlackBerry. Right. There are a lot of emails out here. And if investigators had the whole emails, they would be able to see, were they duped, were they complicit? And this could be one motivation and reason why Barack Obama was so willing to let the Clintons operate in the unusual fashion that they did operate for so long.
Because he was going to get in trouble too.
Right. So if we go to the second to last for the marathon, okay, this is an important one, and perhaps we should have started with it, but
too late.
Too late now, yeah. This final deadline is a great thing for Donald Trump and actually the American people.
But it's bad news for the trustees, executives, and significant donors. It's
extremely bad news because you don't have the option of not filing, right? You have to file something. So you either file a truthful return and confess to fraud, right? Or you file a fake return and hope that nobody's going to see this, nobody's going to focus on this.
I think they'll do that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they have smart lawyers. As they say, one approach might be to throw themselves on the mercy. After all, when you think about the original purpose of this thing, most of the records of the Clinton Foundation are already in the complex and under the control of the National Archives. So the thing has achieved, in theory, its initial purpose, assuming it has all the records. We know from the Taylor Branch book, The Clinton Tapes, that there are secret tapes. We don't know if Taylor saw all of them.
Who made those secret tapes?
Bill Clinton and Taylor Branch. It's a long book all about this that was published in 2009, in which Taylor Branch is a famous, I think, Pulitzer Prize winning author, historian, and it talks about this in 2009. So, Mueller and the people who might have investigated this, could have gone either to the old Barnes & Noble or used Amazon, bought the book and said, hey, wait a minute, here we have Bill Clinton and Taylor Branch talking about making secret tapes. Weren't those presidential records?
That seems like the book that's telling you what happened.
Yeah, what could happen. So this is really bad news for the trustees, executives, and donors. But when we go to the final closing slide, it's fantastic news for people who may want to balance the budget and drain the swamp.
Yeah.
Okay? This blue link is a link to a great document, it's a summary document. It gives estimates of the size of the total American charity landscape. $5 trillion are in assets of these charities. Okay? $5 trillion are sitting there. Okay? And charities understand, the ones that have been around for a while, they understand that you gotta follow the rules. These charities, many of them, may have filed fraudulent returns or are about to file fraudulent returns, and they can't relocate to Ireland. I mean, you can't, go out of business. You can't, make these assets disappear. right? They're sitting there. In theory, they're regulated by the IRS and by states and by the federal government. You know, we have a test case right in front. Donald Trump doesn't have to change the law. He just has to make sure that people are around to see what happens on the 15th of November, 2017. People have to file their returns. They have to, if they fill in false and materially misleading tax returns and then send them over the mails, which is bad mail fraud, or over the internet, or by delivery, by courier or whatever, they will be committing mammoth violations of the law if they don't make truthful disclosures, right?
You know, Charles, Periscope says you're going to need a bigger drain.
Well, good. So this is something that Donald Trump can just use properly to help drain the swamp. People are going to have a lot of splaining to do, right?
Yeah.
And in particular, I'm thinking here, for example, the universities, Harvard, Yale, very well endowed universities, the Gates Foundation, these big, expensive. They can't claim they didn't have the ability to hire experts. They can't claim they didn't understand the law. And it's time, I think, to take a hard look at this whole sector and say, yeah, there are charities that do great work, but there are also too many charities that are enriching or unfairly providing advantages to the people who operate these charities, including being used to intervene in campaigns, political campaigns. So this is an area that needs to be brought to heel here. And $5 trillion in assets is a lot of money. And that's, more than even you have.
Yes, right. You just quoted Hillary Clinton. They need to be brought to heel.
That's right. So with that, in 17 slides, we've tried to tackle using words and explain a landscape that is fertile ground. As this tax bill gets put forward next week, there's going to be a formal system where people will score, they'll take the most recent period and they'll say, in that period, using existing laws, we collected so much in revenue. If we don't change the behavior of the taxpayer, this new approach is going to cost us how much? Because you lower rates, people are going to argue, you're going to collect fewer taxes. But the truth is that wealthy people have the ability to choose whether to monetize an investment or not. If the rates are high, they'll say, you know what, I've got a gain, but I'm going to be slaughtered here if I take my gain this year. I'll take a market risk another year, and I'll recognize the gain next year, right? So if you change rates, if you lower rates, history shows that in the first year when you do that, typically that's the lowest they're going to be for a long time. So anybody who's got a built-in gain in a security or an asset will say, you know what, this is a time to, if I can exit, I'm exiting, I'm selling. So you'll get a bumper crop of capital gains, right, that'll help, which won't be considered. And on this charity exercise, we can do our own estimates. What percent of the $5 trillion in assets, has been accounted for improperly? Are there hidden assets? And what percent can we claw back here? And it's not like you have to go and find those assets, right? The charity has books and accounts, right? They have, if they, God forbid, it's a crooked charity and they say, all right, we know the IRS is going to come after us, let's take money out of the charity. Can't do that. You're only going to compound your liability. So you've got this big pool here. You also have the big pool of assets held by U.S. multinational companies and offshore accounts that's going to come in. So you have really 3 offsets for any reduction in the rates. And I would say the timing is great on this. People have been looking at this Clinton Foundation for a long time. This isn't an isolated case. This isn't a small case. This isn't a case where people got out of their depth. This is a case where people knowingly conspired in the largest unprosecuted fraud, multinational fraud in history, and have gotten away with it for almost 21 years. Donald Trump can make a huge difference, set a huge example, and this can be a crucial tool in draining the swamp for the benefit of Americans across the political spectrum. With that, I will rest my case.
So you're sort of saying hashtag lock her up.
Lock them up.
Lock them up. Very good. Well, Charles, that was quite a compelling presentation. I have to thank you. We've been, as I said, that was a marathon session. We've 2 hours and 40 minutes. So I think with that, we will bid our audience adieu.
All right.
And we'll see you next Sunday.
I look forward to it, Jason.
Very good. Thank you, Charles. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.
We'll see what happens tomorrow.
Yes, sir.